What's up guys, I'm Zach and welcome back to Workshop Edits and welcome to the supercut of the tiny office build series in my backyard. Now this is going to be a very long video with a massive amount of information in it, and I did do my best to sort of chapter out the different sections in it in case you want to quickly dive in deeper to a particular step of the build. I will call out, I do have 9 individual videos about this project that does go into similar amounts of detail but has better, more detailed chapters for you to individually check out. I'm going to link that full playlist up here as well as in the description, so please check out those individual videos if you have not, in case you are interested in more information. So without further ado, I hope you guys enjoyed this and let me know if you have any questions. Let's get to the build. All right, so we're here in the backyard and I've already started prepping this project, but it's been a lot of boring stuff. So far what we've done is removed a planter box, removed my kids' sandbox to a different part of the yard, cut off a giant branch from this tree, all by hand by the way, because I don't own a chainsaw. Then I've gone ahead and just marked out what I am going to be removing from my overall lawn, and it basically is enough space to house the small office and also works around my existing sprinkler system, and it's just gonna fit perfectly back in this corner once it's all excavated. Man, excavation is really, really hard work. All right, so that is all dug out now. So my electrical panel is right there. And I have a raised foundation house. So what I'm gonna do is run conduit from my box under the house. I'm gonna have it pop out right down there, which is a little tricky because it's near my sprinkler systems, but luckily when I had my backyard, or when I was redoing my backyard a few years ago, I took pictures of where everything was. So what I'm gonna do is essentially run, it's gonna be kind of hard to show. I'm gonna trench all the way to like right there. Then I'm gonna trench along right here, on the outside of the grass, and then I'm just gonna end it right here. And I plan on putting my little sub panel on this side, so the trench is kind of gonna go all the way to sort of where that trash can is, maybe a little bit more in. I did a ton of research on this. I also consulted my friend who's an electrician. So from where I am, which is in Southern California, if you are running 10 to Romex through 3/4 inch conduit, which is what I plan to do, it has to be buried 12 inches down. So we just need to essentially trench 12 inches down. And I'm gonna try to do it here without disrupting this lawn too much. I've seen some techniques where you sort of just separate the ground versus actually dig it up. I'm not sure if it's gonna work with this, but I'm gonna give it my best shot. So on to more hard labor. All right, so I just finished running a trench all the way from here along this edge to basically right there. I was doing a bunch of research and it was kind of confusing me. I was reading that if you're doing PVC conduit, you need to be at least 12 inches deep. And then I was reading some NEC guidelines, which said 18 inches, and that's like way deeper than I think I can like realistically dig by myself in my backyard without like destroying it. Then I read that you only need to be 6 inches down if you use metal conduit, so I'm switching to that. I'm gonna pause on that right now because I'm waiting for my Romex to come in. I have all the conduit that I'm gonna need, but I wanna do all that in one fell swoop in terms of like going under the house, measuring, running the cable and everything, and because I don't have that, I'm also not just gonna start this little section down, where is it, here, over here, where I'm just gonna try to divide the yard in half and just drop the conduit in there because it's not super deep. I think it's gonna be way easier. So now that that's done, I've just finished grading this whole area, basically just making it flat, like it's not totally level. I'm gonna start laying out my 6 footings exactly where I want them to be. Then I'm gonna dig like 4 to 6 inches down for each one of them so that I can compact 3/4 inch gravel, which I have back here. I was reading that you want like 4 to 6 inches for like an elevated shed with these types of concrete raised blocks with pressure treated wood and all of that. So I'm just gonna start laying things out, and then I'm gonna mark an area with a shovel that's probably like 50% larger than that, so I have some wiggle room in case I don't totally like where I am. But I figure there's gonna be a lot of excavation, so I might as well get that done while I wait for the rest of the materials to come in. All right, I just finished digging out all 6 of the holes for the footings. My yard definitely slopes from that back corner towards my house. There's no like drainage issues or anything, but I dug these ones in the front just a little bit more shallow than the ones in the back. I then kind of raked and smoothed everything out, and then I used my hand tamper just to really compact the dirt there. Now I'm going to go ahead and add like 4 to 6 inches of gravel and tamp that down in each of the spots. I'm gonna just temporarily place then the footings in each of the places. And right now I don't have the lumber to actually like build the base framing of it to get them perfectly lined up and make sure everything's level, but I'm just gonna go ahead and get as far as I can. And then once I get the lumber in place after I've finished doing the conduit, then I can get everything perfectly level and add gravel and remove gravel and tamp it down further and make sure everything is as compact as possible and also completely flat in both directions. All right, so we're gonna fast forward a little bit. You saw in the previous clip, I threw up the line laser, and what I did is just I went around with that little green plate and I marked, you probably can't see it, this little tiny grid, and what I basically did was just find the highest of those stones and then work upward from it. So I just filled in all the spots and re-tamped it down to bring everything up to the same level, and just kind of went through everything, and I've got it pretty straight. I realized using just like a pressure treated 2x6 board is like not the best way to figure out what's straight, because those boards, they'll straighten out once I frame everything up, but man, they're just like not perfectly straight and not the right way to do it. So definitely throwing up the line laser, and I have everything within like, I don't know, a 1/16 of an inch, which is like plenty flat enough for me for the sake of this shed. It's all tamped down, feeling really good about it. Now that we have that foundation part done, I'm gonna switch gears from that, go back to finishing trenching here. So I've got, again, this whole thing run to right here, and I've got this awesome shovel. And because I'm using that rigid conduit, I only have to go down 6 inches. So all I'm gonna do is actually just shove this thing into the ground and make a very nice straight line kind of from this corner down here to right there, so I don't damage my grass too much, so that I can have the conduit come out from that part, which leads to the underside of my house, avoiding the sprinklers, which are also about 6 or 7 inches deep. And then I'll just bury the cable there. All right, so next morning I just finished trenching everything. Now I'm moving on to running the conduit under the house. So what I'm doing is laying out the pieces exactly where they need to go, so I know that they're the exact length they need to. Now, I've never fished Romex through rigid metal conduit. So what I'm gonna do is just fish it through these pieces at least, one at a time, then use the connectors and connect them. That way, at least when I shove this whole piece somehow through that vent underneath the house, it might not be fully connected. The Romex is already through it, and all I need to do is add the little 2-screw U-brackets to fasten that conduit underneath the house, and then it's gonna pop out over there, and then it should be a lot easier to kind of like run the pieces individually and connect them and bend them as I need to reach my final destination point over there. All right, I was trying to avoid this, but I'm gonna have to go under the crawl space a couple of times because I just have no visibility into the underside of my house, and everything is just getting stuck. So here we go. So I'm shoving the conduit through the side of the house, and then I'm gonna bring you guys underneath there. I'm gonna bring pretty much everything I need, or as best I can, so I can avoid having to crawl in and out of there a bunch of times because it's pretty tight and unpleasant. Let's do it. I hate this. All right, I've made it over to the other side. So what I'm gonna do is take the conduit, which I have right to my left, right there, and right there is that same vent. I'm just gonna place this pipe right up there, get it fastened in place, get the other one connected, and get the hell out of here. Let this be easy. I got it. It's fastened. Okay, now I just gotta clip a few more. That was awful. So I'll just say push, you pull, and if you're finding that for whatever reason. All right, I think I'm done. That was exhausting. All right, I'm gonna get all of this buried, finish over at the electrical box. I'm gonna fill in all the dirt. I think we could finally get on to building this thing. Ground to ground, neutral to neutral, hot to breaker. Gonna flip that back off for now. All right, so I'm in the shop. There's a few small things that I need to finalize before I actually build the platform that the shed will sit on. The main thing is just making sure that the pavers are exactly where they need to be. So in order to do that, what I'm gonna do is cut my 10-foot stretchers that span the width of the shop, cut the 2 outside stretchers that measure the length or the depth of the shop, and build that box square, which essentially will be the entire base of the shed. Drop that into the pavers and make sure everything is perfectly lined up so that I can then sort of lock those in place, dump the remainder of the dirt that I excavated out, fill in like all the holes around the pavers. Then I can start to actually build the platform, add all the stretchers, tie it together with strong ties, like all of that kind of stuff. So got to do this like final amount of prep, and then we're on to the full build. I just am so thrilled that that is just perfectly level everywhere. So I just finished laying down landscape fabric, and then I put some gravel that I tamped down on top of it. I read that that is supposed to help with raised foundations and weed prevention for the long term. So we're gonna get going. I'm gonna do everything 12 inches on center. These are 2x6s. I read that that is like plenty of strength for the size of the project that I'm building. And we're just gonna get going. Finally here, super excited. I'm guessing I'm probably gonna get some questions about the actual screws that I'm using for this. I'm using these headlock from Fasten Master. They're supposed to replace 3/8 inch lag screws, and they're meant for structural framing, and they work with pressure treated wood. I'm using 2 per side. They're 3 inches long, and I'm going to also supplement all of the joists after I get all of them fastened with some joist hangers, which I found out can support individually up to 400 pounds. So like, this thing is gonna be so structurally sound. It's probably overkill, but I'd rather overdo it than underdo it. Also, just specifically for the 4 corners, I got 4 of these really big bad boys just to add that extra strength on the corners. All right, so we just finished doing the joists. Now we're gonna move on to adding some joist hangers. So I got these are like $1 a piece. These are specifically for 2x6s, and because I don't love nailing things, I bought these screws, which I don't know if you can really see, but they are screws that are meant to basically replace nails for joist hangers. So they're gonna do the exact same thing. It's just gonna make it a little bit easier to like quickly run through this, because I'm not used to hammering like hundreds of nails. And so we're gonna add these to all of the structures in the middle, except for the ones that are sitting on top of the concrete piers. And then we're gonna do these corner pieces for the 4 corners. All right, so I have all of the joist hangers and connectors done on one side. Because my kid isn't here right now, meaning she's not sleeping, I switched gears and I cut a bunch of blocking that I'm now going to add in between all the joists just to firm it up. I'm gonna err on more, at least on these outside pieces, and then I think I'm gonna do just 2 in between each of the other joists, and that should really just kind of finish firming everything up. So I'm gonna do that. And I'm probably gonna get the question also for what I'm using, so I'm just using these structural screws. They're 2.5 inches long. They're coarse thread for pressure treated wood, for exterior, for structure. So I think they're gonna be perfect. All right, got the subfloor all finished. Everything's screwed together. All the joist hangers are on. Feeling really good, very strong, very rigid. So we're gonna move on to doing the subflooring. So I'm gonna be using these multi-material wafer head screws from Spax. They're rated for pressure treated wood, specifically call out being used for subfloors. And additionally, just to make it weather tight, I'm using this extreme heavy duty liquid nails. It says it bonds in extreme temperatures, all weather, bonds to wood, and has specific applications for subfloors, so it should seal it nicely, hold everything together, and prevent squeaks. All right, we're in the shop. I've got all of my lumber purchased right there, and we're just gonna get to cutting. So I have my plans and measurements printed out. I'm just gonna follow that to a T. It's gonna be a lot of repetitive cuts. The way that I'm going to do this is build each wall individually on the ground and then either carry it myself or get some help to carry it back and then assemble all 4 walls at once. I've gone back and I've remeasured my platform just to make sure that all of the measurements in my design match up with the final overall size of it. So if I do follow my cut plans, everything should line up pretty good, and I'll be checking things as I go just to make sure I'm not like completely off. Well, it's been 1 minute just focusing on this wall. So this wall is going to be the wall that has my window. My window is 3 feet wide by 4 feet tall. So the rough opening is 36 inches by 48 inches because the actual window is 47.5 by 35.5. So I have a ½ inch to play with on each side. In terms of like leveling it, shimmying it up, and getting it centered exactly where I want it. So the different types of cuts here and the positions of them are divided into 3 different types of studs. So you have king studs, which run the entire length, top to bottom. So there's one here and one here, and they always frame what are called these jack studs, which run in between the windowsill and either the top of your wall or another windowsill, with more what are called cripple studs, which are these 4 pieces that I have underneath here. So king studs framed together with a windowsill with jack studs and cripple studs in between them, and that's what structurally makes this sound. You probably also noticed on the other wall, which is the exact same copy as this, but it's just king studs running top to bottom. I'm also just doubling up the back corners with studs just to help share the overall weight and load of the roof in the rear of the shed for no reason other than I'm just over engineering the whole thing. Hope that makes sense. So minor error on my part. I don't know if this is 100% necessary, but I'm gonna obviously double plate the top of this wall, and then there's also gonna be some cripple studs that go between it and the 212 pitched roof that I have. But I think I need another jamb above here just to butt up against the roof. So I made that jamb, very simple, just 2 laminated 2x4s together with ½ inch wood in between to fill out the space. So what I need to do is cut these 4 cripple studs down by 3.5 inches, move everything down, and then put this bad boy up here. So I would call that great progress. So I've got all 4 walls up. That front one was incredibly difficult to carry by myself, but unfortunately I didn't have any help. What I ended up doing was putting a couple of footings on it and then added a couple of extra like sacrificial pieces that I could like grip and hold onto, and then I just slid it all the way to my backyard. It got a little sketchy there for a second. So I just went around and I checked for plumb on all of the walls, and shockingly everything is like within probably 1 degree of plumb, if not 90 degrees, and that's good enough for me. In order to secure the walls, I used the same structural type of screws that I use for all of the framing, except I used these big 4-inch ones, and that just made it really easy to go through 1.5 inches of wood through the subfloor into the beams at the bottom. And it was nice having the extra blockings that were securing the stretchers at the bottom, because then I could go into them from different parts of the footings. And I just did 1 or 2 screws in between every single footing down there. So that feels really secure. And then I also use these to go through all of the walls, and I did like 5 or 6 per pole. And I think with having the double stretchers here, that also has helped like just really reinforce it. So now that the walls are in place, the next thing I want to do is go in and add my top pieces. I'm not actually sure what they're called. Like you end up, whenever you're doing these types of framings, you end up doubling up the wood on top. So that means I'm going to add an extra 2x4 at the top here and on the other side, as well as the front and back pieces. And in order to connect these 2 walls back here, I'm just going to overlap them. So you'll see me do that next. Cool, that is all done. So we are gonna move on to doing the roof rafters. And so mine's a lean-to roof. I'm using 2x4s for that. I'm gonna space them 12 inches on center. And I'm doing this in a way that's gonna allow me to have the exposed beams inside, have a shiplap on top of it, and then insulate on top of it. I think it's just gonna have like a really cool aesthetic. And I thought it through like pretty thoroughly in my design and like researched it. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just start taking some measurements. So I have 8-foot 2x4s. They're like the top choice version. So like aesthetically, they look a little bit nicer, and they're a little bit more expensive at Lowe's for me. I don't know if they sell them elsewhere. And I'm just gonna start doing some preliminary marking. I want my front overhang to be 18 inches. So my back overhang will be like about 6 inches. So what I'm going to do is mark out one of those, then get up on the roof and position where I want it, and then start marking out where I'm going to cut my bird's mouths for all 11 of my rafters. So let's do that. So I marked right here. That's where I want my line to be, and I'm just using my pencil to sort of make sure that line is with it. I'm gonna do it on this side too. Just gonna roughly mark out the area that I'm gonna cut out. All right, we can go back to the shop. I'm gonna test one of these, fit it, and then I can version this out across, I can't remember, I think I have to do 11 of these. All right, I'm gonna do my best to show how I'm cutting this bird's mouth. So I jumped ahead, so this was the marking that I took up when I had the piece on the rafter. So I'm gonna draw my square there. I'm looking for a 212 pitch, so I'm gonna rotate at my pivot point to the 2, get that lined up, draw my line here. Then I'm gonna flip this over and see this little thing that says pivot point, which is gonna be right here based on where I marked things. This little diamond needs to line up exactly with my marking. Diamond, and then we can draw our cutout. And now we're gonna cut that part out. All right, that fit perfectly. So what I'm gonna do is use that as my template. I'm gonna mark out all of the ones I need and then just do all of my cuts at once. Then we can get to positioning them, and we'll talk more about that when I do that. All right, I just finished cutting all of the birds' mouths. I also ran each side of the 2x4 through the planer just to smooth them out, and it really helped improve the aesthetic of them, even though they're already this top choice lumber. So now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna head up there, I'm gonna mark out the locations for all of my pieces, doing 12 inches on center. So I'm gonna do front and back, then I'm gonna start just dropping them into place. I'm going to drill all the way through with a screw at each end, and then I'm going to tie each one on each side with some hurricane ties as well. So again, just like following like the standard procedure for this type of thing. I had to give the monkey bars a try. All right, so I have 11 out of the 13 rafters installed. What I'm gonna do is now use these lovely little hurricane ties, 8 screws each, do all 11 of them, get them attached, and then I'm gonna finish off with the last 2, which are just gonna go on the interior of these outside pieces. Once I have all of those secured in place, I'm going to attach the fascia boards, which are not going to actually be like the final exterior facing boards. They're just going to be like the structural underside, because I'm going to use some like nice composite weatherproof boards that will just overlay it later when I get into finishing. All right, it's a new day out here. I just finished installing blocking between all of the rafters. That way both the drywall on the inside and the OSB on the outside have something to bite to up top. I also finished installing all of the fascia boarding around the roof. Again, that's not gonna be the final look of it. I am gonna use some really nice composite boarding around it, but the overall structure of the roof is nearly complete. The last thing I'm going to do is go in and add some spacer blocks, both underneath the rafters on top of each wall at the angle, just like more cripple studs essentially, as well as spacing and blocking between the outside fascia boards and the inside. So just finished doing all of the framing, the blocking, like basically done overall with all of the structural stuff underneath. I could do one of two things next. I could either do all of the outside sheathing, so I got OSB, which is right there, or I could do the Shiplap ceiling, exterior and interior. I think I'm gonna do that. I'm just like exhausted, and lifting a bunch of sheets of plywood and cutting them and all that just sounds like a task for tomorrow. So I'm gonna take you over and just show you the wood that I got for the shiplapping, and then it's just gonna be a lot of repetitiveness, so I'm probably just gonna do a time lapse of me installing all of it, starting with the interior. So here is the pine shiplapping that I got. I got it from Lowe's. It's actually really affordable. It comes in 8-foot or 12-foot by 7.5 or 7.25 sections. And I'm gonna start by just doing the overall interior here on top of these rafters. So let's cue the time lapse. Pretty stoked with how this is coming out. I think it's gonna look awesome when it's all finished. Sheathing day, let's do it. It is done. It is really hot and that was exhausting, so I think I'm going to call it for today. Next up is taping all the seams, which I think I'm going to wake up early and do in peace and quiet. Woke up early and got all of the seams taped off. It only took like 45 minutes. It was actually a really satisfying experience. I'm moving on to doing the house wrapping now. I've gone ahead and done the first row. Really easy, really straightforward, especially if you have one of those tack hammers. The paper I'm using is 3 feet tall, so I'm gonna overlap it by 6 inches and work my way up. One tip that I got is, because I'm working solo, it's really hard to maneuver that paper and kind of roll it out and keep it level and all that kind of stuff. So you use just like a long pole and a clamp, and that sort of provides you with like a second set of hands so that you can fasten one piece in place, roll out to where you need to, and set that pole, and there it sort of stays level with you as you go and makes it a lot easier to do. Obviously, if you have 2 people, this process goes a lot quicker, but it's just a tip that I picked up, and I've already done it with just the first row alone, and it made the process way easier. Got the Tyvek all installed, got all of the seams taped off. That was actually like a relatively simple process. Obviously not a very big structure, but I was surprised at overall doing it by myself for the first time ever, how overall like simple of a process it was. With all of the exterior work complete, we can move on to installing both my window and the sliding door. All right, so we're gonna move on to installing windows. Now, I've never done this before. I've done a lot of research on it. I've watched a lot of videos. I am just going to follow the exact instructions provided by Tyvek, who makes a very similar type of paper to this, and just follow those exact rules to make sure that the window is installed properly, it's level, and it's watertight. First thing we're gonna do is cut out the window opening. I'm gonna do it in the shape of an eye, so a cut at the top sill, a cut at the bottom sill, and a cut down the middle. So I'm just gonna find my bottom. Actually, let's do the middle cut first. Here's the top, so we're gonna cut all the way down vertically. Gonna put my ear protection on. I'm gonna take these flaps, fold them back in, just do a couple of staples. A few days ago when I was doing the sheathing and I was cutting my window openings, I didn't do it exactly in line with the overall window opening, so I'm gonna grab my router and a flush trim bit and just actually run it along at least this top sill here just to fully shore up and have this sill be flush with the sheathing.
Now that we have the opening cut to the exact size that it needs to be, we're gonna move on to flashing. So this is 6-inch window and door flashing tape. I've seen this done a bunch of different ways. The way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to lay a strip that goes up about 6 inches on each side and down across the bottom of the sill. It's gonna cover the inside here and wrap around to the front, and that creates a moisture barrier for the window to sit on. They make rollers for pushing this down. I've seen people just use scrapers just to really work it in, and that seems to work the best. This stuff has a little bit of flex to it, and it really seems to just rub in really nicely with a scraper. Kind of work it into all of the wood grain, into the corner and up the edges, and fold it over the edge, and that's gonna create that watertight seal. So I'm gonna start just kind of working my way. Help kind of feed it around this corner. Do this one first. Get that on there. And pull this one over. Same with this side. Really pull it down. They do make specific tape that is 4 corners. It's like super expensive. I didn't buy it. It didn't seem necessary, so I'm not doing it. What did I just do with my scraper? Got my window. Here, seeing me do this live. I hope it fits. Heck yeah. Cool. Looks great. I'm gonna take it back out, see if it's level, and see if we need to shim it up. Wow. Hey, perfectly level. How about that? Hey, she did something right. Okay, cool. So I've got my window laid down on the ground. This is the top side. I am using white Dynaflex superior flexibility crack proof seals joints for interior and exterior sealant, specifically for windows, doors, siding, and trim. So in order to properly seal a window, you only put sealant on the 2 sides and the top. And the reason you don't do the bottom is if there is water or moisture that somehow does make its way in, it's always gonna run to the bottom of the window, and by not having it sealed specifically with window sealant, that gives it a place for the moisture to leave. So we're just gonna run a thick bead of caulk around these 3 sides while my assistant sunbathes. Okay. Whew. All right, so we just finished securing the window. Got nails in all 4 corners, and then either nails or screws every other opening here. Thing feels very secure and it is perfectly level. So now we are going to move on to just waterproofing the rest of it. So we're gonna do flashing on each side of the window. And then I saw 2 different ways to do this. One is to have your Tyvek tape actually fold over the windowsill and then to flash it, or you just flash it with this tape over the windowsill. Both seem to work perfectly fine, so I'm just doing that for simplicity. And that should wrap it up. So we've got house wrap folded in for the edges here, water sealed with flashing at the bottom, sealant caulk around 3 sides, open on the bottom to let moisture out, and then flashing tape added vertically on the sides first to over drip the bottom here, and then on top to drip down and out over the window or out and down the sides here. And I think we should have a waterproof, water sealed window. My first ever. You what? I love your bathing suit.
We're gonna put some water in something
Uh-huh. Did you have a good nap?
and swim.
You're gonna swim?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Daddy's gonna finish doing this, and I'll watch you swim, okay? All right, so just finished installing the sliding glass door. I installed it in the exact same way that I installed my windows. So that included flashing at the bottom, then I caulked the 3 sides of the door that weren't the bottom, put it in place, and because this structure was perfectly level and I've been checking over and over again to make sure that the walls are plumb, I didn't have to do any shimming with it. It just sat in, dropped in really nicely, and was already perfectly level on the top and bottom. Once that was pushed in, I again secured it with nails and screws around the border. Then I did flashing tape up both sides, flashing tape up at the bottom, and then you saw me also do one extra thing, which was cut these 45-degree angles in the Tyvek tape up here, flip it up, and then drop it back down on top of the underside flashing that I installed, and then did an extra row of tape, and that just creates a redundancy overall to prevent moisture from getting in. Again, like, it's got this 20-inch awning over it. It's all nice and sealed off. I don't expect there to be any issues, but again, like, I'd rather just double up the redundancy to prevent any issues down the road. One last thing I want to call out is just when you're installing these sliding doors, the vertical pieces on the outsides have some flex to them. So you want to make sure that once you pop it into place and you know that it's sitting perfectly level and it's adjusted to be in the center of where you want it in your rough opening, make sure that when you secure these side pieces to your wall with your nails or your screws or a combination of both, that there's no bow to it. So grab a really long straight edge or a really long level or just like anything that you know is perfectly straight and remove that flex in the door and then secure it in place. I had to do that with both sides of it. It was something that I actually forgot until I started doing it. I was like, wait, this seems off. So just like take your time on that step, and that way you end up with a really nice square sliding door. The doors slide nicely, screen door slides nicely, and overall like your installation goes smoothly and that you don't have to go back and undo work, especially once you have this flashing in place. That's just gonna be a huge pain in the butt. Doing things just a little bit out of order, but just because it just came in, I'm also just sealing off the bottom of where the tape was meeting the pressure treated boards with some like flashing joist tape. It's 6 inches wide, so it's giving me a lot of play in terms of how far down the Tyvek went, and then tying it all the way into the joist. So overlapping the Tyvek, the OSB, and then into the pressure treated wood. And because it's made for joists and flashing, it sticks to the wood really well. It's the next day, and I'm going to switch to focusing on all of the electrical installation. So I have my sub panel hooked up. It's a sub panel, so the most important thing to remember about that is your neutral and your ground need to be separate from each other. That's not the case on your main panel, but it's a very important thing to remember when you are hooking up a sub panel. I've obviously had an electrician friend help me with this part and like consulting on all of that kind of stuff, so just make sure that you are fully understanding what you're getting into with that kind of stuff. Now that that's hooked up and the breaker is off, I'm going to start putting in all of my rough-ins for electric. So that includes the installation of all of the boxes, running all of the Romex through the studs, getting the lights installed. So I drew up this really fancy grid of where I think I want to lay out everything. One thing that I am doing is I'm doing 20 amp breakers for everything in this. I think that is like both a California future code thing as well as just sort of future proofing this. And I'm going to be running 2 total breakers. One breaker is going to take care of all of the lights, all of the like office-based electric stuff, so like computer, chargers, any of the kind of stuff that you would plug in at a desk. Then I'm going to have a separate 20 amp breaker that will be fully dedicated to just being able to power one window AC unit during the hot parts of the year, as well as an exterior outlet that at some point will run to a future sauna that we plan to put in the back. And that way none of the electricity in here in terms of what I need to actually like have a functioning office for my computer setup, the lights working, all that kind of stuff is compromised when I know that during like the hot months of July, August, early September, I'm gonna be wanting to run a small AC unit in here pretty much full time. Since I am not a licensed electrician, but I know what I'm doing, and this is like very basic electric stuff, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about exactly what I'm doing, but I'll just give a few pieces of advice that I've learned along the way. First is that I know that you need to have Romex positioned at least 1¼ inches deep into the studs. And the reason for that is if you are hanging shelves or you're doing drywall, you don't want your Romex to be close enough to the exterior of the walls so that you might nick it with a wire and damage things. So I came up with this little spacing block just to make sure that I'm drilling all of my holes far enough back in the studs so that it's up to code. I also read a tip that your hammer should be roughly the height of any boxes that you plan to run lower on the wall. So instead of having to like grab my hammer every time, I just made this little jig that both will tell me the depth that I need to have the Romex run back into the wall as well as the height of the bottom of the box. So that should make things a lot easier too. The last thing is that a lot of people will say, well, you definitely don't need 20 amps to run lights, a computer, all that stuff. Like it's probably not going to draw a max of like more than 5 amps at one time with everything running. One, that's fine. The key is to make sure that you're using a breaker that is 20 amps and Romex that can handle the right current, as well as having outlet receptacles that are rated for 20 amps. So I have all of those things. The problem would be if you had a 20 amp breaker and you were running a smaller gauge wire like 14-2 Romex, because what would happen is your breaker would allow for more current than that wire could ultimately take. That wire could heat up, and that's what ultimately leads to electrical fires. So as long as I'm using a breaker, Romex, and outlets that match up with the 20 amp breaker amperage that I'm going to be using, it won't be a problem because the devices that are plugged into those things will only draw the amount of current they need, and the wire itself and the breakers are going to be outputting the aligned proper amount of electric for it. So I don't think this process is going to be overly complicated. I'm going to start by installing all of the boxes where they need to go. Then I'm probably going to mark out where I want to install my lights and get those roughed in. And then I'm just going to hook everything up. This might take all day or this might take 2 hours. We'll just kind of get going. I got this really sweet spade bit that has this screw on the end. This is a 3/4 inch bit. I kind of wish I bought a 1 inch one, but what it does is it grabs the wood and it drills so quickly through. I would highly recommend spending like $8 on one of these when you're doing any of this electrical work. All right, so I got all the boxes installed. Now I'm just gonna go and drill all of my holes out across all of the studs to start just feeding all of the different Romex through and sort of connecting the dots. Again, like I have a rough plan on paper and I know ultimately what I'm aiming for, but I do not have like an exact process for getting to that final solution. So I'm really just gonna kind of do it as I go and make sure and like double check my work. All right, so that took all day. I got almost everything done, so I'm just gonna take you around and show you the electrical that I got done yesterday. So here's my panel. It has two 20 amp breakers, and the thing about this panel is it's split. So actually only 3 of the circuits are hot, and I happen to have these double gang 20 amp breakers. So this is the only one that's gonna be in use, and this is the only one that's going to be in use, and I'm actually going to add a 15 amp breaker here for one more outlet. This 20 amp breaker powers this cable right here, which runs down into this box here. That forms a branch circuit. One of them goes all the way to these 3 light switches, because I'm going to have 3 sets of lights in here. These are the inside lights. There's going to be 4 4-inch can lights. These are going to be for 2 more of those can lights outside that are going to go underneath right here. And then this one is going to power a set of sconces. One of them is here, and one of them is here, and they're going to be facing outward. And I'd ran out of Romex, but obviously it's going to run up to here. and connect over to that one. And then for the can lights, both of these run up, attach them to the studs, and then they run up through the roof, and the lights are going to be installed today. I actually was able to mark those out before it got too dark last night. So coming off that branch circuit, we'll have that outlet there, one there, and then one all the way over here. So 4 total outlets and really low voltage, low power pulling LED lights. Should be plenty on a 20 amp breaker. The other 20 amp one comes down to this box right here, which is actually an outside facing one. That is on this side. I have a GFIC 20 amp receptacle on it and a weatherproofing box. That eventually is going to power a sauna that I'm either going to buy or build and put back here for my wife. That external facing weatherproof GFIC outlet extends all the way across. That's what the extra row of Romex is, over to that outlet there. And the whole point of doing a separate 20 amp circuit specifically that could power either the sauna or this outlet over here is so that during the hot months I can plug in a window AC unit here, have that on its own breaker, and not worry about any of the other electronics that are on a completely separate line being tripped up. You also might be asking, why did I use 12 gauge wiring for all of this? Won't that make it more difficult to fit everything in boxes? The answer is because I already had it. And yes, it was a lot more difficult to fit all of that, especially in the triple gang outlet that has 3 light dimmers. Last thing I'm gonna do is add one more 15 amp breaker, and it's gonna power just one outlet up in this back corner and then another one in this corner. And the reason is I eventually wanna have a TV in here and I wanna have a dedicated outlet up there, and it's gonna be easier just to have one single set of extra outlets run off its own breaker versus trying to tie into these other ones. I can use 15 amps, I can use 14 gauge Romex, and it'll be a whole lot easier. So besides that last set of work, the last thing I need to do, besides the last small set of installations for those outlets, the one thing I need to do is install an 8-foot grounding rod to my electrical panel for this build. I've seen this done a bunch of ways. I'm just gonna try the water method where you just dump a little bit of water in the hole and shove it down manually and then keep repeating that process. And then I think for like the last 6 to 12 inches, you probably need to use like a 5-pound sledgehammer, but that overall seems to be the most effective method of doing this, and I don't have a hammer drill to do it anyways. So I'm gonna do that really quickly, tie that into the electrical box, finish the installations, and then we can move on to installing the lights. I cannot believe how easy that was to install that without a hammer drill. I don't understand water and fluid dynamics, but the water method literally had me install by myself in under 4 minutes an 8-foot grounding rod into the ground. The last thing I did before I went to bed last night was mark out where my 4 can lights are gonna go in here. So what I'm gonna do is take a small drill bit and drill a pilot hole up through. That way then I can take my light template that these can lights come with, use that to mark out the circles that I'm going to need to cut in the shiplap. And I was strategic and I made all of my can placements directly in the middle of the 7-inch wide shiplap, because the hole I think I cut is only like 4 1/4 inches. So it's just going to be a lot cleaner to cut that versus like trying to do it across 2 pieces of wood. Once I cut all 4 of those holes, I can drop in the can lights, daisy chain them all together, and we can test this thing out and hopefully finally have power in here so that when it gets dark I can keep working outside. Oh, I'm also going to use some 8 gauge copper wire to tie the panel into the grounding rod. I was pretty unaware at how simple they make recessed lights these days. There's like a million options on Amazon, obviously at your big box stores, but it's super cool. They come with, you know, depending on what size you get, this light, and they don't require an actual can to put them in. They're round recess lights, so I guess they're not can lights. They just have these tabs that will pop into the hole that you cut and then grip it in place. They have this plug on the end of them that plugs into a junction box, and the junction box, it comes with one of these for each one. So I got a pack of 6, so there's 6 of these in the box. These cords attach together and then screw into place so you can't pull them apart. And then these boxes are awesome because they come pre-wired with everything you need to just make them very plug and play, especially with the connectors, which is amazing. It makes it so straightforward, like anybody can do this. And these are cool because they both work on dimmers, which is why I installed dimmers, and they have 5 different temperatures. So the nice thing is, the way I'm doing my install is there's going to be this area around that I cut where these are popped into place and screwed into place, and then I can always, if I want to, pull that light down really easily and adjust the temperature like this. So it's really early in the morning right now, so I'm not going to use the jigsaw to cut these out. Instead, what I'm going to do is get all 4 of these boxes in place and wire it up to the Romex that I ran up through the roof from the dimmer switch. Then once it gets a little bit later in the day and everybody's awake, I can make a little bit of noise and cut these holes out. All right, here we go. Panel wired up, panel grounded, breaker on. Wait, look, they're on. Let's see if they dim. Oh, I did something right. Oh my gosh, it's perfect. Lights are done. Lights inside are done. Oh, I did it. I'm up here on the roof. It's a beautiful day. I'm going to get my rigid foam insulation done on the roof. It's almost the exact perfect size just to have 3 of these sheets of 4x8 1-inch thick rigid foam. The only thing I have to do is cut around where my light placements are, and then I can drop them into place. And I'm going to attach them using these fast and tight screws. You can see them, they have like a plastic cap on them. They'll drive through the foam but won't go through it because of that plastic cap, and they'll go into the roof below it. Then when I actually put the OSB on top of it, I'll drive screws that go all the way through the insulation, through the roof, into the rafters. Getting the OSB secured to the roof on top of the rigid insulation that I laid down the other day. I'm using the perimeter to secure the wood and like make sure that it's straight. The roof is actually very, very square, so that's helpful. Then I'm also using these big 4-inch screws that I already had to drive through the plywood, through the insulation, through the shiplap roofing and into the actual studs underneath. So that's pulling everything down and securing that OSB before we move on to felt paper and actually tiling the roof and doing like the rest of the finishing up here. All right, just finished so many things. So I wanted to tackle the entirety of the roof. In order to start that, I needed to paint all of my fascia boards. Well, I needed to get my fascia boards hung up and then paint them. So I ended up doing 2 coats of this black color called Tomcat. It's a matte color. It looks freaking awesome. Once the paint was dried, I went on and I sealed all of my edges and all of my joints in the OSB and up to and around the fascia boards. Then I can move on to flashing. So I did the rear flashing first with roofing nails over the edge, the 2-inch drip edge, and I'm using black flashing to match the black trim. Then I did the sides. Ow. And I smashed the shit out of my thumb, so that felt great. Then I moved on to roofing paper. So I wanted to do the rear and side flashing first so that then the roofing paper could layer on top of it. So there's a bunch of redundancies in the overall like moisture protection of the roof. I'll have the OSB, then with the sealed edges, then with the drip edge over those edges, and they're also sealed with like roofing sealant caulk type stuff. Then the roofing paper with plastic cap nails is over those edges, so a third redundancy. Now the last thing to do is the shingles. So it's about 12 by 8. So it's about 100 square feet of roofing shingles, and I'm just gonna go one row at a time, staggering them as I go per the recommended instructions. Doing it all by hand, don't have a roofing nailer, but I don't know. It's kind of nice to just swing a hammer and get better at it so I don't smash my thumb in the future. The other thing I did was pre-cut my side pieces. I'm sure there's a term for it. There's a really straightforward method to following to cutting these, and it allows you to have the least amount of waste with the shingles that you buy. So you start by using a full strip, then you take another strip, you measure 10 3/8 inches in, and you cut that in half. You end up with 2 pieces. Then you take another piece, you measure in 16 3/8 inches, and you cut it down there, and you end up with 5 pieces that are stacked quite evenly, and you just repeat that 5-step pattern so that your shingles are offset and you don't have seams that end up on top of each other. Well, annoyingly, I ran out of tiles, but I got really far, so I just gotta finish up that back corner over there, but overall, it's looking really nice. Finish up the top, put the drip edge on, and this roof will be finished. All right, fast forwarding, the roof is done. So my neighbor happened to be redoing his roof with the exact same black shingles that I was using. So he was cool enough to give me 5 of them. So I finished up this back corner, and you saw me cutting and cornering the 2-inch drip edge for both of the fronts. So those went on last over the top so that water will run either in front of it and then down the fascia boards, or it will run down the roof and then over the first double layered set of shingles. So those were hammered down with roofing nails, and then I went back with my roofing seal and I sealed each one of those nails. The flashing, I feel really good about this. I'm really excited to not have to get up on that roof anymore because it is 100% complete. So my plan for the underside of the overhang is to do a painted shiplap. It'll be the same color as the fascia board, so that like nice matte black. So I started off this morning by painting everything, like doing a first layer of paint on it. Just figured it'd be a lot easier to paint things on the ground versus getting everything up and trying to do multiple coats of paint. Doing this totally solo, so the hardest part is definitely hanging these 12-foot long pieces. Luckily I have 2 ladders, so I'm just going slowly, lifting them both up on top of the ladders and then trying to just push and add some brad nails as I go, and as I go things start to secure in place, and just making sure they're properly cut to length. For the middle of the long pieces, that is where I'm going to have my 2 recessed lights that will sit on the underside. They're the same ones that are on the inside. I just got 2 of them out here on a separate switch. So I marked and measured out evenly inwards once I had that piece cut to length. Used the same template and cut it out with a jigsaw. The third piece is a little bit tricky because it overlaps the corners. So what I had to do was measure the width from the remaining amount of space in between, and then I used my circular saw to cut the very small sharp corners, and then I did a 2-part cut on my table saw where I marked out what I needed to do, set the fence to that exact width, and then I raised the blade up in it, did a pass one way, turned the saw off, lowered the blade, flipped the piece over, and then ran the saw the other way. And that way I had a really nice, straight, clean cut. Just got that piece hung, and I'm really, really impressed with how well that came out. Like measuring 3 times, cutting twice vibes. Now that I have all that done, I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna cut all of my 8-foot pieces to account for the sides. That should go really quick because it's just brad nails in each of the 2 places where I put wood to attach them to, running all the way down. Then we're gonna have to cut a couple of pieces to go the length, just 1 piece to go the length of the rear side. Got all the boards installed. I'm gonna go around and use some silicone and seal up all of the nail holes, let it dry, and then give it 1 more coat of paint. And that's gonna be done. Looks awesome. Now that the entire roof is done, all of the electrical is done, the soffit is done, I really can turn my attention to 2 different things. 1, the outside facade, or 2, the inside, insulation and drywalling. I'm probably going to go back and forth between them just based on how much I probably am going to hate drywalling, but it's really nice out right now. I don't have any of the exterior materials. I don't have the drywall yet, but I do have the fiberglass insulation. I do have the spray foam insulation for all the corners. So I'm just going to spend a little time going around to all of the corners and all the bases and any of the exterior outlets and do the spray foaming. Then I think we're going to spend some time in the evening doing all of the fiberglass insulation so that then I can actually get the materials for drywalling and have a blast doing that. Best part about having the electrical done means I can work at night. So I have a beer, I have music, and I have insulation. So I'm gonna work for however long it takes, but I'm gonna try to get all the insulation done. A few tips that I read, and they're specific to working in California. 1 is have the moisture barrier facing the inside I don't know why, but I think because it's generally just hot and we're trying to keep our places air conditioned, it helps to have the moisture barrier facing inside. The other thing I read was that when you get to wires, ideally you will split the fiberglass insulation in half and go half on one side and half on the other. And that way you don't press the insulation up against a wall on the exterior or the interior, and it's like split nicely. The other tip I read is that you use your studs as your like backer to cut a straight line, and try to use a straight edge if you can, just to make your cuts nice and clean. And the last tip I read was fill every space possible. So that means like cutting small things, trying to fill the space behind outlets. So like, I've never done insulation before, so I'm just going to start with one wall, figure it out as I go, and follow all the rules that I read. This should be like a really enjoyable evening. I guess one of the benefits of having an OSB flooring is it can basically be my cutting board. So this is what I was talking about. I've got Romex wire up here. You can essentially split this. I'm gonna go put a mask on after this. I'm gonna feed this underneath. I'm so itchy. But I am done. I need to do a little bit more research on drywalling, and I'm not prepared to do it yet. So I'm actually going to switch to finishing the exterior of it, which I'm excited for, because then from the outside, it's going to look like it's done. What I landed on was a board and batten style exterior that uses the James Hardie cement board. In my research, a few things that I learned, which if you're not familiar with that style, here's what I know. It's cement board, which means you need a very specific type of carbide tip saw blade to do it. So I picked up this 7¼ inch blade. So this would fit your circular saw if you have a 7¼ inch circular saw, or it actually has a 5/8 inch arbor, which means it can actually fit my table saw. So if you have a table saw with really good dust collection, which gratefully I do, then you can throw this on your table saw and rip thin strips for it versus having to buy the really expensive pre-cut thin strips to do the actual batten of the board and batten. So I'm going to do that. The other thing I learned is this stuff is cement board, and it is no joke for your lungs, so it's very important to wear a mask and other types of protection for it. So I'm definitely going to do that as well. I have some medical grade N95 masks. If you have a respirator, I think that would work really good too. Also, I learned this stuff is super heavy, so I need to cut about 15 to 20 strips that are 2.5 inches wide for my battens, then 7 to 10 3.5 inch wide strips that are going to be for my trim. So I bought 9 sheets of this 4x8 James Hardie smooth style board and batten. They're like $50 a sheet, so it does add up quickly. But the pre-cut stuff is so expensive. So luckily I do have the tools I need to do all of this work. 7 of them are going to be for paneling, and the only thing to know about doing the board and batten paneling is that you need to cover up the seams. So people tend to do the battens at 12, 16, or 24 inches on center, sort of like whatever they planned out or whatever works aesthetically best. So on the front of the office, it's going to be 24 inches on center because that's going to look the overall like most even and clean. And because it's wider, I think the 24 inches will just look really nice. On the sides, I'm going to do 16 inches on center because that also looks the cleanest in terms of the overall layout.
And then on the back, I'm not even gonna worry about it because nobody's ever gonna see it. So again, this stuff is super heavy. I'm doing it by myself. I think what I'm gonna try to do is just see how easy it is to handle this stuff by myself, and if I need to pull in help, that I will. But what I would like to do is get this step out of the way. That way I can transition to just working in the backyard, cutting all of my panels to the exact shape that I need, and then install should be relatively simple with these cement board screws, and then finishing nails that I have for the board and batten. Then we can get on to painting. Looks good. Let's give it a test. Okay, the one downside to having a saw stop is that you cannot use blades smaller than 8 inches, meaning I'm gonna have to cut all of these strips by hand. Luckily, I have one of those Craig rip cut jigs, and I think it's gonna work perfectly. It just might be like a little more time consuming, but I'll be able to do everything on the ground. I don't know, slightly annoying, but it's gonna be fine. All right, I have moved to outside. Eye protection, ear protection. Got this medical grade respiratory mask. Doing everything I can to be safe. Got circular saw hooked up to the rip cut. Gonna start by doing the 2.5 inch strips. I hope this goes smoothly. I've got my board on the end of my grass. I'm basically just trying to protect my grass as much as possible. This stuff is gonna get messy, and if it all lands on the dirt, I can just dust blow it back into a corner, and it's out of sight, out of mind. So safety first, trying to keep this clean. Hopefully this goes smooth. I forgot that circular saws actually cut better if you cut the piece upside down, so that all of the fraying will happen on the back end and the cut is clean on the bottom. So I just flipped over the piece, and I'm gonna do the remainder of the cuts that way. That was surprisingly easy. That blade cut through that stuff like butter, but super messy. Definitely wear your protective gear when you're doing that stuff. So I've set all of those strips aside. I ended up cutting 15 2.5 inch wide ones, which I think is sufficient for my build, and 10 3.5 inch wide ones, which will encompass all of the window and door trim as well as the base trim. I think just having the slightly different widths will accent things a little bit better. So I'm going to turn my attention to doing the boards. Now, I sketched out everything here, and I actually designed it in Illustrator, so I know how my panels all will lay out. This stuff is really heavy. I'm going to basically do the exact same thing that I just did, which is use the rip cut and my circular saw to make the cuts. I'm just going to do things one at a time, hanging the panels one at a time, and ultimately just see how this goes. Might have to pull in help again based on the weight. Using these rock-on fasteners specifically for cement board, and they're coated so they'll work for exterior. I'm going to use them for the actual boards, and then for the battens I have some 12 or 14 gauge nails that once you paint over them, like, you're not even going to see them. So we're just going to get to it one panel at a time. That was a really tricky piece. Trigonometry finally paid off. I think this might be my least favorite part of the project. So heavy, so dusty, very complicated to work with. I do have everything hung except the pieces in the back, which I care the least about. I want to move on to doing the trim. So for the bottom and the borders around the window and the door, I am doing 3-inch pieces that I cut. For the battens and the corner pieces and the top stretchers, I did 2.5-inch pieces. I'm going to start at the bottom next to the door to keep everything even and level, and then work my way around the bottom perimeter, around the windows and the door, then move on to the battens. And I'm going to be using nails for this instead of screws, and hopefully I get better as I go putting these things in, because then I can just touch those up with paint and it'll be super easy to hide them. First piece, the plan, once this is done, is to do a deck. Small deck that comes off. And I think that deck is going to be very simple. It's just going to start right at the bottom of this door. Therefore, I want this trim piece to be maybe just like 1/4 of an inch lower than that. And then I will evenly do that around the entire base. It's kind of my jumping off point. That's at least the thinking. I don't know if there's a right way or a wrong way. 3.25 inches, that's gonna be my top reference point. Then I'm just gonna make it level all the way around.
I want to take a minute to actually explain what I'm doing, because I haven't probably done a good job at that. So I'm doing a modern farmhouse board and batten siding look for this office. That style is coming back. I think it's really clean looking. I think as kind of a DIYer beginner with this type of project, it's actually a really good way to hide some of your mistakes that probably aren't noticeable on camera. Board and batten is really just a 2-part finish. It is the board, which is the overall back wall piece, and then the batten, which is a thinner strip of trim that goes over that board, and it's used specifically to create a pattern that will both hide any of the seams in your boards and just complete the overall look of your project. Now, in the old days when board and batten first started, it was usually done with 8 or 12-inch boards and then thinner 2 to 3-inch battens, and you had a nice repeated pattern, and that type of facade holds up really good long-term if you paint it and maintain it. Modern day technology, there are metal siding products, vinyl, there are smart siding products, or there is, in my case, cement board. So this is James Hardie cement board. It comes in smooth or wood, cedar texture and patterns. I went with the smooth version of it. It comes in really heavy 4x8 sheets. So this part of the project has been incredibly taxing on my body to actually complete as a solo person doing the project. For the battens, you can really do whatever you want. You can custom create the widths that you want. In my case, I created 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch width ones from bigger pieces of board. You can buy them prefabricated. Sometimes they are thicker products. So if you want more contrast between the board and the batten, you have that available to you. It does get pricey the thicker the material you get, both from like an overall depth and a width. But if you have kind of the tools and the capabilities to create your own, it's definitely cheaper to do. I think the most important thing that I learned when doing this is that it is all about figuring out the layout that you want and knowing where to start. So if you are doing a 12-inch on center or a 16-inch on center, you usually want to start from the middle and work outwards so that your overall aesthetic starts in the middle and is even working outwards, and that's usually what you do. In my case, I am going with a 24-inch on center board and batten look, and this wall is exactly 10 feet wide, so it actually meant that I could just start from this wall and work all the way over and have battens every 24 inches ending over here and having a nice even pattern. If I didn't have that, I would start from where I wanted in the middle and work my way outwards. Again, the overall goal is to have a nice, clean, even look, have all of the seams covered, and that's what gives you that really nice, complete look to where you don't even know where a board underneath one of the battens starts and stops. I've got all of the walls up now, so I've started moving on to doing the trim. In order to fasten the trim, I'm just using some galvanized exterior rated side nails for it so they'll hold up to weather, and once you paint over it, you're not really even gonna see them unless you're up close. And this is how you complete the batten look. So the next steps are finish the trim. I'm going to prefabricate all my corners. I read that that was a really good thing to do so that you can just slap them in place as one and fasten them versus trying to get one in place and then match up the corner. That seems like a really good tip, so I'm gonna run with that. And then I'm just gonna go piece by piece and round out the rest of the trim on the project, as well as get all of my battens in place.
Making those corners ahead of time was the best thing I could have possibly done. That was super easy. I am finally done with the siding and the trim. That was so difficult, and I don't know if it's because I'm a beginner or what, but that just took forever. I mean, that probably took like 15 hours. Just difficult, and I guess I went slow and wanted to be precise. But we're done. Now I am going to move on to caulking and sealing all of the joints. And I got this really cool electric caulking gun from Ryobi. It was like 80 bucks. I've already used it for a couple of things. It is like the greatest thing ever. So I'm hoping this goes really quickly. Gonna let that dry overnight, and then we can paint and be freaking done with the outside of this thing. All done, ready for paint. You know when you think you have great momentum and then you get ready to paint and realize you spent an hour and a half using non-paintable caulk for the exterior of your house? And then you have to spend 3.5 hours removing all of that, and then another hour reapplying it. That just happened. But it has been fixed. We are ready to paint. Let us paint. Got the entire exterior of the build all finished up, and I also installed a couple of these modern looking farmhouse sconces that are dusk to dawn, so they turn on and they have like Edison low temperature light bulbs, and it looks really good. Like, it's really exciting just to have the entire exterior done so we can move on to finishing the inside. So we're gonna start with drywall. So I've never done drywall before, so this video will definitely not be like a comprehensive how to do it. I've done a huge amount of research, and I'll actually link probably what I found to be the most helpful videos that are just like very good step-by-steps if you are a total noob like me to doing drywall. But I can at least walk you through a couple of tips that I learned and the process that I'm going to go through to wall this off. Because it's only one room, it's square, I don't have to do the roof. I think it's going to be relatively straightforward, but I'm sure I'm going to run into some pain points along the way. So the most complicated part, I think, of this is going to be doing the drywall that goes up in between these joists up top. So what I plan to do, at least for this back wall, is to do drywall vertically. So instead of doing horizontal sheets, which would lead to more butt joints, I'm going to do vertical pieces, which will allow me to have no butt joints on this back wall. The way that drywall works is you have a butt joint cut end, and then you have the soft rounded over like smooth edges. And if you look very closely at those rounded edges,
you'll notice that while the overall sheet is a 1/2 inch thick, on the very edge it dips in just a little bit, and the reason for that dip is so that when you put those two joints together, it allows space for you to actually put tape and mud in between, and you have to do, it's a lot easier to do the overall application of taping off those joints and smoothing those edges. When you are doing butt joints, which are either just the short ends of the material or any cut edges, it's a much more involved task of putting that tape and sort of finding a very long drawn out way to smooth those two pieces together, because you essentially have the taped mudded joint sticking out a little bit further than the material. So my overall process for pretty much everything in here, but at least this back wall, both side walls, honestly all of the walls, is to avoid doing any butt joints if possible, because as a noob, I just know it's going to be a lot trickier than a process that I'm already unfamiliar with. One thing that I really wish I had thought through, but I'm not really sure how I would have avoided, is being able to get a 10-foot sheet in this room, because it would make all of the horizontal joints like way easier, but there's no way for me to actually maneuver a piece that's bigger than 4x8 into here, just because of like where the window is, where the door is. Like there's just literally not enough distance, so that's why I'm going with the vertical joints. For anybody who's like in the comments watching this, I have read that like over really big spans doing vertical drywall is not like the best idea, because it can kind of like, by having it horizontal, it gives you more studs to attach to, so it's just going to be flatter. I don't really see how that's going to be a problem here, so I'm just going to go for it. So I have 1/2 inch 4x8 sheets of drywall. I have my big drywall square. I've never cut drywall before, but everything I read says have just a scoring blade, and then you can break those pieces apart. So what I'm going to start by doing is this back wall. I'm going to butt a piece that is cut to the proper width to line up with my studs up against the roof, so that then I can mark out where I need to cut out the notches for the joist, which are up here. And then I'm going to repeat that pattern across. I'm going to have to do it again for the joists that are up here as well. And then the side walls should be hopefully really straightforward. I just have to get that angle right there correct, but trigonometry, baby. One other thing that you have to do when doing drywall is make sure that you are taking accurate measurements of where all of your outlets need to be cut out, or electrical panels or light switches here. That's just something that's like, definitely measure it twice before cutting. I have done that a couple of times like in my shop, and I consistently got it wrong, and I've tried to learn from like what my mistakes are with that. So I don't know, we'll see. Because drywall can absorb moisture, it's best to place drywall 1/2 inch or more off of your subfloor. So I'm just going to use a 1/2 inch spacer and take that into account for all of my measurements. Once you put in flooring and trim or baseboards at the bottom, like all of that gets covered up anyway, so it's definitely something you should do. One other thing that I didn't take into account, and I researched it, when you are doing framing with the intention of doing drywalling, there is a specific type of corner joint that is called a California joint, or a California corner. And essentially, here I'm going to spin you around. Essentially what it does is, back in a corner like this, the framing for this wall right here is all the way back here. So there's nothing on this side to actually attach the drywall to. So a California corner is essentially what I went back and added, which is just some blocking for that drywall to rest up against. So it's going to rest up against the floor here. I have blocking there, and then obviously it's going to rest up against here. If you do a true California joist corner, whatever it's called, you'll have a beam that runs all the way here, and I'll put a visual of it. But I ended up doing that over here because I didn't have it, and I did some bigger ones in this corner and in this corner. So just like one more thing to take into account. So with all those like little tips in mind, new process for me, I will bring you along for the journey and show me installing it, and I'll call out like any other of the pain points that I seem to run into. I'm really hoping this process goes smoothly, because I oddly think it's going to be enjoyable, and I'm really excited to enclose everything. And now that I've gone back and like double and triple checked all of every single like electrical thing, and everything is like ready to go for this, so it's a super exciting thing. Last thing that I'll call out is, in a previous video when I was installing the receptacles that would eventually house the sconces that are outside, I was using wall-mounted plastic ones, which I truly don't know if those are rated for outdoors, but I did go back and I'll show you. I swapped them to these metal junction boxes, which seem to just be the overall like go-to of what I should be using. So I swap those also, so nobody yell at me for using the wrong thing in a previous video, because I fixed it and they work great. Time to get started. So I've decided I'm going to start in this back corner, and the reason for that is from this corner to here to on center is 44 inches. It would be 48 inches, but that's from, if I was measuring from this outside stud, that's kind of where the California corner comes into effect. But that'll allow me to use the most of one piece of sheet here versus starting on that side and then having to work my, like I'm gonna end up with the least amount of waste. So what I need to do is measure 1/2 inch off the ground to allow for the spacing to be off the subfloor, up to this height right here, then the extra height here, and mark out where I'm going to notch out all of those so I can raise the piece up. One thing that I didn't think through, and I don't really know how I would have gotten around this at all, unless I literally didn't follow code, is these hurricane ties are going to be covered on this side, but you are going to see them on the beams up here. I've sort of just embraced that this is a mistake or like a visual thing I'm going to have to live with. The only way I could see doing this is like literally removing them, which I don't want to do because that's not how you build things. Or I could potentially cover these beams with like faux beams down the road if they're really bothering me. But I'm not going to do that right now.
Can I come in your office? Thanks.
Daddy's getting ready to hang up some stuff in the office. How was dance?
Good.
Yeah?
Why are you writing?
Drawing out a big straight line.
Why?
Because I'm measuring so I can put this in there.
No.
Yeah.
1 second.
Okay.
This goes off.
It's close. Just need to cut a little bit of relief. Totally wrong. Don't know how I did that. Gotta fix. Okay, number 2, lot smoother process. I learned so much. I'm gonna have to hide a lot of mistakes on that first piece. Piece number 1, piece number 2, lot cleaner. And look, I got the outlet right. I got one whole side done. Those were a little trickier than I anticipated, but 0 butt joints, so feeling really good about it. Just gonna be rinse and repeat. I'm gonna do the opposite wall that has the sliding door on it next, and then finish off with the window and this wall right here. A full inch off. I've got this board secured in place in all of the like critical points. I'm gonna take, I don't have like one of those drywall trimmers, but I have a router with a flush trim bit. So I'm just gonna route out that piece here. It's probably gonna be super messy, but I think it's the cleanest way to do it overall. One thing I didn't anticipate is working with full sheets of drywall in a very tight space. I had to cut to width first so that I could then take the measurement. Well, I had to cut to width first before I could take the measurement of the angle up here and translate to the board, just so I could have the butt joint in the corner here and have the nice tapered edge here to make my mudding easier. I'm pretty bad at somehow measuring these boxes, so I'm just marking here and here, and I'm just going to put this piece in place and then cut around it with the power off. I also marked right here, and then on the upper side of the window, because once I get this enclosed, I'll know where I can start my router and then route out the window perfectly. It fits. Got my last piece placed here, and I marked out exactly where my electrical box is. So I'm gonna pull it back off, use the jigsaw just to make it like super easy to cut. That'll be the last piece I have to hang. From the looks of it, I think I marked it out properly. That's not right. Finished all of the main parts, and I have a couple of mess ups. I have no idea why I have so much trouble measuring out these gaps, but I've got one here to fix and one here to fix. Maybe one more in that corner. What I'm gonna do is just use thin strip to go behind in these areas where I can, and then I can screw those in from behind and then attach drywall on top of it, and then we'll end up mudding over the seam. So I've never done this before, but I think it's pretty straightforward. It'll work. Sorry if it's a little echoey in here, but now that all the drywalling is done, I'm going to do two things. The first thing is tackle these gaps up here, which is something that has been on my mind for a while, but I left all of the research until basically right now. I knew from the get-go there was no way I was going to be able to get these gaps perfect between the drywall and the shiplap roof that I have. And the reason that it's been on my mind is drywall can absorb moisture, but I think for the most part, like, it doesn't expand nearly as much as the wood that it might touch. So this gap is gonna have different amounts of movement involved with it. My initial thought was just to use something like big stretch caulk that could just span that gap. To be totally honest, that still might be a good viable solution. And I think that's what I plan to do with these gaps. They're a lot smaller in terms of the actual width of the gap, and they're a lot smaller in terms of the distance between the wood and the drywall. And overall, you don't have to worry about movement that much when your gaps get that small. But there's a product out there that I found, and it was so hard to find in Southern California. It didn't exist within 100 miles of me at any of the big box stores. But the smaller mom and pop stores, they've got it, and they got it for cheaper. So let me show you what it is. So this product is called Trimtex Peel Away L-Bead, and it comes in 1/2 inch or 5/8 inch, depending on what thickness you are using for drywall. The way it works, it just seems awesome, it's perfect, is it essentially creates a sharp edge for you. So what you'll do, and I'll take you up there actually. I already cut this piece to length. So this stuff is made out of vinyl, so it cuts easily with just like a pair of snips if you have them, or even scissors, I would guess. You can obviously use a miter saw if you want things to be really quick repeat, and I might actually do that just because I have quite a few of these. But the way it works is this piece will go, make sure you guys can see this properly, all the way up here against this top edge and create a nice sealed off straight joint between the top of the plywood, or the top of the drywall, and whatever surface it's coming into contact with. I found a bunch of different like DIY articles and professional articles that recommended this specifically for drywall to wooden exposed beams to make it have that nice clean look. So what you'll do is you'll use a spray adhesive. There's a very specific one that they make for this that's, I guess, for probably vinyl plastic. They literally don't sell it in California, and it doesn't feel like you specifically need that. What you really need is just anything that is like a multi-purpose spray adhesive that can stick with plastics and like other materials. So I just bought the regular like 3M77 spray. So you can spray it on the back of the piece here, then let it tack up for like 10 seconds, hold it in place nicely. And if you want to then supplement that with like staples or little nails to really secure it in place, you can, but you don't have to. You then can apply your coats of mud, like 2 or 3, and sand in between, both onto right here, and then, you know, smooth that out onto your drywall. Then you can wait till, you know, you paint. So you've gone through sticking it on, your coats of drywall and sanding and painting, and then there's a little tiny tab up here that you can peel away, and it gives you this really nice clean edge, all while protecting the surface that you are, you know, going into, and then it just gives you a nice clean joint. Now, in my case, because there's a slope in the roof, and it's probably the case for a lot of people, there's gonna end up being like a 1/4 inch gap. That I'm just gonna fill with either regular interior paintable white caulk or like big stretch caulk, because I'll have this nice joint on all of these to kind of represent the drywall to wood transition, and then just seal off that gap entirely. These things are super cheap. They come in 10-foot sections. They are like $3. Like, I can't imagine doing this without these, and I'm so glad I was able to find them. So I cut this one to length, which is gonna go all the way up here. I'm gonna just do a test off camera to make sure I get the process right, and then I'll do one on camera just to like make sure I know what I'm doing and I'm showing the proper installation of it. All right, so that was literally as easy as could possibly be, so let me show you how it works. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna measure this distance, which is just a little over 10.5. So here's the L strip, comes in a big section, so I'm just gonna take that measurement. Got my $7 snips from Harbor Freight. Just gonna make a snip a little over 10.5. A little over 10.5, and then you can see it just cuts just as easily as any vinyl product, thin vinyl product you might have. So there you go. So you got to make sure that you're obviously putting it on correctly. The peel away strip is the smaller end on the front here. So you want to make sure you're putting your glue on the back. So let's do that. Backside. Just going to do one pass. Just 2 clean passes. So I've been giving it like 15 to 20 seconds to sort of gunk up and get set in, and then let's take you up to the piece. I'm gonna show you how easy it is. I'm literally gonna do it one-handed. So backside, piece goes up there, get it up to the top where it needs to go, and then just gonna hold it in place, let the glue set for like, 10, 15 seconds. Just kind of push it in its different places. It's a little bit tricky. My hand's not big enough to span all of it, but I think it's gonna be fine. Super easy. So I already got 2 of them done. This is going so fast. It's so easy. Drywalling is so easy. I just knocked out the other side too, and you can see I actually ended up putting them, these gaps, for whatever reason. Let me see if I can zoom in. These gaps were just a lot bigger. I don't know. It's really hard to like score these around posts. So I ended up using these underneath them. It's not necessarily on the other side, but it came out really, really good. That Trimtex LB tearaway, like super easy to work with, and it's hiding all of my mistakes. which is awesome. So I'm ready to start mudding, and I'm trying to just decide like what I do, like what stages I do this in, because my gaps everywhere are actually really, really good. And I'm very impressed with like how good I was able to do them with so little butt joints and like in corners. Like it's quite good, because what I read you usually do is like a pre-mudding stage to fill all of these gaps. But they're like, this is the widest gap and it's like a quarter of an inch. There's like nowhere else anywhere in here that has that. So I'm like, do I even need to do that? Or just should I do it and take my time? And I can't decide if I want to do that. Or what I could do is use the big stretch caulk that I have and go around all of the joists, which I could do also. Or I could just start mudding all of the L trims that I did. That's what I'm gonna do. Okay, so next up, what I'm gonna do, thanks for coming with me on my journey. I'm not ready to start taping yet. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to go around and pre-mud all of my corners. I'm gonna pre-mud this one butt joint that I have so it's like a smoother surface to start with. I'm going to do the first round of mudding on all of the L joints. And I guess I should go around and just do mudding on all of the screws as a first round too. And I'll do it also like a pre-mudding on any of the places where I had to do like a little bit of patchwork. 24 hours later, I can come back, sand, do my next coat. I'll probably finish with caulking last. I've never done this before, so I'm just sort of figuring it out as I go, and I don't think there's one right way to do it. So I appreciate you guys just listening to my process. Let's do some mudding. There's a million ways to mud. I'm not even gonna begin to go into all of them. There's hot mud, there's different setting times, there's joint compounds, whatever, I don't care. I bought this stuff. It's pre-mixed. I read if you are doing taping to avoid swelling, you might want to like water it down a little bit, but we're not doing that right now. So literally I'm just gonna get my drywalling trowel, put some of this crap in here, get my various types of putty knives, spreading knives, whatever, and I'm just gonna go for it. We'll see how it goes. I don't think I need to tape off anything. The other point to pre-mudding, which I'm trying to find an example here, but actually I didn't really have much here. I'm gonna spin you around. So this joint right here has some cracking. Technically when you pre-mud, you wanna like knock that part out because it's damaged and fill it back in with compound, because then you can go back and sand it, make it straight and it's solid and all that kind of stuff. However, the only places, do I have anywhere? There are no joints, I think I checked all of these, anywhere where those aren't going to eventually be covered up by baseboards, trim within a window or a door, or molding that goes around those things. So I'm like not even gonna bother with that either. Let's just have some fun. Let's like make this fun. Just for a quick descriptor, this is all-purpose joint compound. It can be used for all coats in the reinforcing and concealing of joints. In wallboard construction, it can be used for taping, finishing, fastener concealment, filling corner bead, and texturing. Doesn't say anything about working time. One other tip that I got is, I'm trying to find one, although I did a pretty good job with these screws, is if you are putting the compound over your screws and you're finding that they protrude too much, oh, here's a good one. So this screw right here, if I mud over it, it's sticking out a little bit too much. So get my screwdriver. I was told just take your screwdriver and do a quarter turn, if possible. Okay, I might need to use two hands to do it, but 1/4 turn, that will recess or like dimple it in, and that way the compound can just go over it so that, you know, it's more recessed in. You go, so. Gonna do my first L bead strip here, so I'm just gonna nice clean panel. Just go all the way. It's kind of nice because that strip at the top sort of, you know, protects the wood. I don't have to tape off anything. Just get all this off. It's kind of tricky because I'm a perfectionist. But I think because we're gonna do multiple coats of this, that's totally fine. I just finished doing all of the non-joint mudding. So all of the screws that are not gonna have tape that go over them have been mudded with a first coat. So that includes all of the L strips that I did and around, and I'm hoping I can just sand off. I'm gonna end up like doing a nice cleanup of all the wood up top, and other way. Did it up here too. Definitely doing the extra pieces under here is making a big difference. And then I did like the pre-mudding on a couple of places, like right here at my only butt joint, just to start filling that in, and I ended up getting rid of some chipped away pieces and just all of the areas that don't require tape, at least right away, or I can kind of do this in pieces. It's gonna have to be in pieces anyways. And I filled in that corner because that was the only corner that had kind of like a big gap. Everything else is like ready to go. So now that I'm here, I'm gonna do taping, which I know is gonna be like a little bit of a different task. So here we go. I'm gonna start on a very easy, simple wall for me. Never done this before. The tips that I read for this are, if you are using pre-mixed joint compound, so not hot mud, a lot of times what happens is you will put your tape on and mud your joint, and then come back 24 hours later and there are blisters. I think it's called swelling, or maybe it's called blistering. I think it's called blistering. And just for what it's worth, I'm gonna put a video in the description that is like a 2-hour video that goes through every possible step for drywalling, and it's incredibly helpful. And this is where I got all my information from. So I'm just giving you a couple of tips because they're applicable to my situation. But when that happens, it's because you don't get enough mud underneath the tape. So there's not enough moisture in there to swell and absorb the tape and wet the tape, and that tape then delaminates from the wall. So there's 2 ways to combat that. You can add more water to your compound for this first one, or you can just make sure that your coverage for mud underneath it is enough so that if you were to peel off the tape, the entire piece of tape would be covered with mud. So I'm just gonna overuse the compound underneath, because what's gonna eventually happen is we'll stick on the tape and we will squeeze out the mud behind it just so that it ends up like running flat here, to the point where you're better to over coverage and use more compound, because compound is really cheap. Like each of these bins that I got, or like a 5-gallon bin, is like 20 bucks. So there's no reason to be overly conservative with your joint compound. So I'm also switching to a slightly smaller knife. So again, I'm just gonna do this wall live, not make it too long, and just kind of go through the motions and see how it works. So I've seen a tip that was basically like, you can put more mud on by going sideways like this, so that you're not kind of scraping everything off when you do it. Need it too. So that feels like a good amount. Point here isn't to scrape off everything I just put on. What I read was get a clean version of your trowel and just depress it lightly and just kind of butter, as if you're like buttering toast down the wall. That looks, I don't know, that looks like pretty good coverage. I see some areas that aren't great. So I'm gonna mud up this entire wall real quick, and then I'll come back when I'm done. And take tape. Tape needs to go all the way up to here. Going to unroll it a bit. Make sure I'm actually putting this properly on the joint. Actually gonna tear it right there so that I can move this starting piece over a little bit. Again, I know I'm not gonna be perfect at this. What I wanna make sure I'm doing is just getting the tape nice and gooey behind and stuck to it, and making sure that I'm smoothing out as any of the sort of ridges behind it, like these bumps, which again, not a big deal. Now I'm not gonna pull this off because I think I did a really good job, but if I were to pull this off, I would wanna make sure that my tape had joint compound pulling off all of it with it, because that would mean that there was significant coverage behind it. All right, I think that's good. So now I'm just gonna take more mud and I'm going to lightly go over it. Again, I'm not like building up a huge significant amount here. I'm actually gonna, you know, for this I'm gonna switch to the wider one. With any of these joints that are the rounded corners, remember there's a depression in between these joints, so you're really actually kind of taking compound and filling that empty space with it. And that's what's gonna bring it up, all the walls up to like the same level. Remember, this is just also round one. We're gonna have sanding, another coat. I heard there's something called a flood coat. I'm excited to desktop research what that is more tonight. All right, I'm gonna finish up this wall. I'm gonna repeat everything I did around to, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, and this was 5. There's only 5 joints overall in this. God, I love working in a tiny space. Then I'm gonna do the corners. I'll go through the corners, just a couple other tips and tricks I read, but it's basically the exact same thing as this. I'm sure it's just slightly more complicated. I'm assuming most people who are somewhat familiar with drywall know this, but drywall has a crease in it, so you can fold it perfectly for corners. The other thing is this angle right at the tip is 90 degrees, so if you can get nice and in that corner, you're gonna get a good smoothing process, versus if you're kind of here, it's gonna elevate and not go as well. At least is what I read. I've been keeping it in this corner. It seems to be going well. Hi, baby. How you doing?
Can I come in?
You can come in. But Daddy's gonna finish this thing right now, okay? So you can't pick you up. Got round one of everything mudded, all of the joints taped off, all of the tops taped off. Gonna let it dry for 24 hours and come back and sand. Really, really happy with how it came out. I think between filming and learning and doing research kind of in between things to make sure I was doing it right, that took like 3.5 hours. So tiny rooms, not that hard to drywall. All right, day 2. It's been 24 hours. I'm going around looking at all of the tape joints. Everything seems to be good. No like delaminations or anything. So I'm just gonna do some sanding. I'm not gonna bore you with it. I read like you don't really have to sand between coats. What you're really trying to do is just knock down any high points, and you can do that either with a scraper. So like right here, I can just kind of scrape off that high point, or right here, or you can use a sanding block, which I'll probably do a mixture of both. I think mainly up here in these places. Then I'm gonna move on to doing my second coat with the joint mix, and we'll talk about that when I get to it. All right, that wasn't too bad. We're gonna move on to coat number 2. Again, million different things I read about this. Some people with their hot mud talk about thinning it. Joint compound, I read you don't need to thin it. It's just on the second coat you wanna use a wider broad knife, I think is what they're called. So I have, I think a 10-inch one and a 12-inch one. I'm just gonna see which one is easier to use. I am going to thin my joint compound just a little bit, like nothing crazy. I don't want it to be like liquidy, but just something that I think is just a little bit easier to work with. The other thing is I'm gonna just be strategic about this next coat. So yesterday when I was trying to be very thorough, I was overdoing it in terms of places that I just know are gonna be covered up with trim or molding or any of that kind of stuff. I'm just not even gonna worry about those places this time, because it's just a waste of mud and it's a waste of my time. So the main focus is gonna be these joints up here, all of the corners, all of the seams, and then anywhere that I did patchwork, like here. And I think this will go a lot quicker because I'm not doing any more taping. I'm using a bigger trowel. And really this step is about filling the space a little bit more and creating larger, smoother edges over the run of things so that all the walls can be somewhat brought up to being flat. I read that like some people don't even do a third coat. I'm very curious to see how this goes, for this space, and I'm just very curious, like, oh, am I gonna even have to do a third coat? But let's start with the second one. A little bit of water with the joint compound. I'm gonna mix it in the trowel because I obviously don't want to just add water to a full new bucket of the joint compound, which, by the way, sands really easily with just like a 120 grit sanding block. Let's get to it. All right, drywall and mudding, not that hard. Drywall and mudding well, hard. So I got second coat done on everything, and to be honest, I think it looks really good. It might look really messy on camera, but for a total new beginner following directions, I think it's pretty dang good. All of the tape joints, they look really good. Everything is smooth and feathered. These big kind of gaps that needed to be filled, I'm just quite happy with how it all came together. Sanding this was super easy. So I'm gonna do another round of sanding tomorrow once this all cures, and then decide like what the third coat really is and how to go about it. And if it's like a really thin top coat, if it's a flood coat, which I read about. So you'd see that L trim really disappears on that second coat. So overall, another good easy day with the drywalling. Gonna be moving on to coat number 3. So as best as possible, I'm gonna be using, this is a 10-inch broad knife. This is 12-inch. So the key for doing this last top coat is really trying to thinly spread and really flatten out as much of the gaps as possible. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm also using another joint compound. This one, it's the same brand as the one before, except this one is specifically for top coats. It comes in a much bigger size. This is the 3.5 gallon ones versus that's 2 quarts, I think, but this thing was like 12 bucks. And so I don't have any use for it after this, so I'll probably overuse it. But I'm really just trying to finish smoothing out all of the joints and cover up all the places, because then I want to move on to painting after this. So I don't want to spend too much time going into all the specifics on this last coat, but the key thing that we're aiming for on this is a broad overall coat that creates the most seamless transition between all of the joints. I'm not sure how well this is going to show on camera, but this down here is a manufacturer's joint. And if I put my piece underneath here, it's probably not going to show super well, but if I get really close, you can see there's just like the smallest of gaps there, meaning overall I need to just, based on all of the joints, fill that final gap so that this is as smooth as possible. And I'm sure if I went around, let's see, to this joint right here, actually that one looks really, really good overall. I'm sorry if this isn't translating to camera very well. Here's another one, let's see how that looks. That's pretty good too. So that is the current plan. All right, again, not an expert here, so everything I read was, don't need to be conservative with this top coat. So what I'm gonna do is just pull from the bottom up, do this nice overall, oh, that's already messy. I'm gonna fill in that space as best as possible. I'm pressing somewhat hard, but overall I'm just filling in this middle gap here. This top coat is thinner than that joint one, so already I can tell it's a little bit easier to spread out. It's also a different color, which is actually making this already easier just to see where I've spread this on. So I've got middle spread, then I'm just gonna go one over, dropping compound pretty much everywhere. One on the outside here, flinging that everywhere. I'm terrible at this. It's good to see a beginner doing a terrible job, right? And then I'm gonna do one on the outside here. Again, just pressure all the way down. Get as much of an even coat as possible down the middle. So far, I would not advise using this trowel, or not this trowel, this broad knife. Okay, now that I've got this spread, this isn't perfect, but essentially what I'm going to do, let me clean off my knife, is essentially, again, I'm trying to spread wide in the middle here to fill this gap. So I'm going to try to feather the edge, feather this edge. I'm pushing harder this way, but really I'm just kind of running it along the wall here, not taking away the compound in the middle here, similar to what I've done before, but just feathering a little bit more. Put all that compound back, and then technically one smooth, not trying to scrape it off, just trying to, you know, flatten the middle as best I can. It's actually really, really good. Okay, I just did all of that live. It's gonna be really boring to see me do that in more detail, but I'm essentially just gonna do that whole thing again right here and try to smooth all of this out. I'll come back to you once I have it done. All right, I am done. I don't ever want to drywall mud again. I think it looks pretty good. I'm gonna say it one more time, then we can paint. I'm gonna do my final round of sanding. I've already started, and what I've realized is that although the top coating version of the compound I used wasn't the easiest to work with, it sands really, really easy, so I'm not putting a lot of pressure, just very light sanding, and it's coming out very smooth. The other thing that I'm gonna do, and it's gonna be hard to sort of show this, is it was very difficult to do really precise mudding up against those joints, so I'm just gonna take a little razor blade and get up there and cut away those pieces and do a little bit of light sanding as well, because eventually after I paint, I'm gonna go back and caulk all of those, so they will be pretty clean looking transitions overall, but those are the last two steps I'm gonna do before I can paint. I've never had the pleasure of painting new construction where I don't have to go all the way to the ends of things. I don't really have to tape anything off because it's the bare floor. So I think the only tricky part is just going to be painting around the rafters. As usual, that's been the complicated part of this, but got my ultra white paint. I'm very undecided as to what the overall ultimate aesthetic of this place will be. Like right now, I like the wood ceilings. I like white walls. It's going to be light, beachy, beach house vibes in here. Sometime down the road, I'll probably change that, but for now, just really excited to get some paint on. Two coats of paint all done. Think it looks awesome. I'm really excited actually just to trim out the windows and the doors. I think that really is going to tie it together. Same with the baseboards. I have an idea to just complete the beams up here, so I'll take you through that step. Overall, I think it looks great. Next step is going to be cleaning up all of these joints. So again, these are peel away, so we can get up there and we can peel off the hard edge of all these things. I'm sure they're not going to look perfect. I'm then going to use some big stretch white caulk, and I'm just going to flush up every single joist to drywall piece, and I think that will look really good, but I'm waiting for the paint to dry. But overall, pretty happy. It's very clear that I am an amateur drywaller who missed a ton of things, but at this point, I'm the only one who can see the mistakes. All right, so one detail that I struggled with a little bit, it's a detail that I hadn't figured out yet, and then it came to me as I was doing the finishing of the drywall and the painting, was how to deal with, it's kind of hard to see, this joint up here where the drywall on the angles on the sides meet the shiplap. Ultimately what I realized is because it's basically a piece of trim, is I could take just a clean 2x4 and rip it in half, and it becomes a piece of trim that will match the joists up here that are exposed, and then I can just place it up against here, brad nail it in place, and then caulk the seam, and it'll look like a really clean joint overall. So I took a nice 2x4 that I could find.
I ripped it in half.
Alexa, turn on the vacuum.
I planed it down on both sides and I sanded it. And then I marked out this angle up here and translated it to angle on my miter saw, and I went back and forth a couple of times just to get like a really tight fit on both sides. And now I can just lift it up in place and secure it on both sides.
Looks pretty good.
Once that piece is in place, we can go around, we can peel all of the L bead off, and we can use some caulk to then finish the seams, and I think it's gonna look really good. It's gonna kind of like tie everything together. I'll be very excited to be done with this whole process because it's definitely been one of the most tricky ones to figure out for this build. I'm gonna start pulling off these strips. Let's just see how clean these look. I have a feeling there's gonna be more touch-ups than just simple caulking, but we'll see. It's kind of hard to get off. Just gotta break the end and then let's see. That's about what I expected. Let me see if I can get really close. So you can see, it's definitely gonna need some cleaning up, but I think between cleaning it up, some caulk, and then touch-up paints, it's gonna come out good. I'm gonna peel the rest of these off. I'm also just wondering, like, did I build up too much joint compound on them and there's some buildup there? I don't know. I don't know how I would have done it differently.
Those strips peeled away pretty well. I'm gonna get up there. I've got a sanding block and I've also got some 120 grit paper, and I'm just gonna clean up the rough edges for it on basically all of them so that then I have kind of the flattest edge to create the caulked joint between. And then I think after I do that, I'll probably go back and do one more round of touch up with paint up there. This is where it's just like a bunch of boring finishing details, so I'm probably not gonna show a lot of it. I'll just show you the after. Also, I hate this stool. It is so freaking loud. This combo works really well. So I've got this whole side cleaned up in terms of peel stripped away. I sanded down sort of like the excess caulk, I think, as best as possible. I'm sorry, the excess joint compound that was kind of up against the ridge that's been created. I truly don't know how this is gonna go, so I've got this product called Big Stretch, which is just a type of caulk that can span, I believe it can expand up to 500% its original size. It's paintable. It comes in 12 colors. This one is white. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna pick one of these and test doing the caulking in between. That'll tell me if this is like easy to work with, if I need to tape off something, if I need to have like a brush or like something wet to kind of wipe off the excess. Because what I'll do is I'll caulk it, and then if that's good to go, I'll do all of them, and then I can come back and do one last round of touch-up painting for it. So let's see how this goes. That was a little bit trickier than I anticipated. I think I learned a little bit. I need to up the overall speed on that electric caulker. To be honest, the electric one might not be the right tool for this, but I got this one done. Actually looks pretty good. I figured out that using this little foam brush just to smooth out some of the excess and then having like a wet paper towel to do it. I'm gonna go around and finish it. I don't even think taping anything off is gonna really do anything because there's not really a great surface for tape to stick to because of where the shiplap is. And I think I can get it off with this and a wet cloth. So I'm gonna test out one more right now. That was a lot easier. What I'm realizing is the gun's hitting the next post and causing a little bit of trouble, so I just got to go a little bit more vertically. But that was a lot better. All right, finished all of the detailing and the painting, so I'm gonna call that step done. So I just wanna quickly touch on it, and what I'm realizing, and I brought it up before either in a previous video or earlier in this video, is that ultimately putting those hurricane ties up made everything more complicated. They should be there, but putting them where I did has made it more complicated. It made hanging the drywall more complicated because I had to cut around them. It made mudding around them more complicated because I couldn't use that L bead everywhere. And ideally what I should have done is, with the gift of hindsight, I should have removed all of the hurricane ties that I had put up, moved them to the outside so that the interior of this place would be just the joints. It's the only thing you see. I could have been a lot more liberal about my cutouts for the drywall. I could have used L bead everywhere. It would have been a lot easier to mask and tape off. I am not kidding when I say that I think I spent probably 8 total hours detailing everything around these joints. So that included more spackling, more caulking, smoothing all that out, removing excess, painting, taping, painting again, clean up and sanding. Like, I just made that process so much more difficult for myself. However, it's really important to me that that looks good. And while I'm pretty much at this point never going to be able to do anything about the hurricane ties that I can see, although you actually can't see them from this angle, and I think it looks really good. It's just something I'm gonna have to deal with, and I do think it came out really, really good. I will take you up there just so you could see. It is not perfect. It's reflective of my skill set, and it's reflective of a lot of hard work and planning put into it. Just not quite enough planning, but we are wrapped on that. I can go around, I can install like fixtures, although I think I'm gonna need to order some oversized fixture plates because my cutouts aren't great. I spent some time sweeping and vacuuming up, and now we are ready to move on to installing laminate floorings, which I'm really excited about. I think like that's like a big final piece of this place, sort of to tie everything together. We are getting down to some of the final stages of the build. So the 2 things I have left are the flooring, which I've ordered and it hasn't come in yet, and the trim for the windows, the door, and the baseboards. I thought a lot about this. The overall aesthetic of this place is supposed to have somewhat of like a coastal craftsman beach vibe, but then the outside is kind of like modern farmhouse, but I don't know, it's kind of like a bunch of styles blended together. Because the roof to me is supposed to be somewhat of a focal point in here, which is why the rest of the walls are white, I don't want, well, and because I really only have 1 window and 1 door, and the space isn't that big, I don't want this window to be like too much of a distraction. I just want it to sort of complement the ceiling. So I found a couple of different references that sort of brought together a blend of things that I had on my mind. What I think I want to do, and I think is gonna look good, is this window and the door are going to be cased and then trimmed with somewhat of like a coastal craftsman vibe that is going to be wooden, and it should match the ceiling. I haven't finished the ceiling, and I'm not going to put a finish on the trim because if I find that they're just like not complementing each other, then I can homogenize them by picking a really nice finish that ties them together. Same thing for doing the door, but I'm going to wait to do the door until after I do the flooring. That way I can make sure that just like the casing and the trim for the dooring specifically complement or match up with the how I lay the flooring. So overall, the plan is today I'm just gonna focus on doing simple window trim, casing and window trim for here. Normal coastal craftsman has, it's like very pronounced on top. And I think because this space is small, I don't want that again to be too much. So what I'm probably gonna do is take down that design and just overall like shrink it. So like if it was gonna be 5 inches on top, maybe it's like 3.5 inches. And if it was gonna be 3 inches on the sides, maybe that's 2 inches. And you know, if it was to stick out 4 inches on the sides here, maybe it's, again, it kind of complements here. So
I'm figuring out a little bit as I go, but I want again, this window should be not a distraction. It should sort of just tie in together with the roof. So the overall look that I landed on, just to sum it up, wooden casing and trim here, wooden casing and trim for the door, and white baseboards. I think that's gonna look good. The great thing about that is if I find that it's just like too much wood or like, it looks bad, I can just paint it. I have this really nice piece of what I think is pine, but it's like really straight and beautiful, and I can't remember where I got it from. I think a friend gave it to me, and I think it is going to be the perfect thing to use for this specific piece of window, and then I'll have to find like a really nice 2x whatever to finish framing this out again to complement it all together. So let's go to the shop. It's gonna be great to actually just work in the shop on this project because I haven't been there in a while, and we're gonna start cutting all this down.
So this is gonna be the bottom casing piece. So what I want it to do, so let's figure out what orientation I want. There's a knot here, so maybe I don't have that. But there's a knot here. That feels right. So this is 43 inches wide. My window opening is 36. So so that leaves 3.5 inches of overhang. So let's get that. So 3.5 inches. I think I want to leave like an extra 1/8 of wiggle room. So we'll go 3 and 9/16. Mark my ends. Then I know that the depth, because I took measurements, is 2 13/16. So I can just round that up to 7/8 to give me, again, a little wiggle room. So we'll go 7/8. So let's mark that. So now I have to notch these out. This is still, I think, the best thing I've ever 3D printed. It's just a spacer block so that you can cut with a sled up against your fence and you have to worry about clamping the block. Just fits right on. That's exactly 1/2 inch. It's the best thing ever. If you want access to it, I'll put a link to it in the description. It takes 2 hours to 3D print. It's the best. For all this trim, I'm not doing like a chamfer or a bevel or a roundover. I'm just using this fine grit, brand new sanding block, and I'm just gonna break the edges. Whew. That's really nice. I saw this technique where you use screws to add just a little bit of spacing so that your piece doesn't sit exactly flush with the top, and it helps just like if your trim isn't quite thick enough or like based on, here, let me show you. like this window gap up here isn't like 100% even, and it's a little bit bigger than I would like. So you can drill screws up in a couple of places, and just that's how like you can shim it super easily and get the fit that you want. So I'm gonna do that just for this top piece. I've got my two side pieces, and I'm going to do an even reveal of just over 1/4 of an inch on each side. So I've got my little marker just to drop these into place. And for full transparency, my window is not perfectly square. That's why I shimmed this one right here, which has given me a nice even reveal on this side and this side. So I'm going to take my first piece, just figure out which way I like. I like it this way. So it's going to go right here, and I cut it long so that now my top pieces can sit on top of it, and I'll have the same reveal up here. Hold that there for a second. Oops. Got this trim header piece that sticks out the same width as the piece at the bottom. It's going to sit just like this on top. To attach it, I'm going to go brad nails down through the top here. Then I'll get my last header piece in place and go up into that to tie it all together. All right, well, this came out awesome. I think you can see how it kind of just complements it, but it's not like an overpoweringly large header, and the reveals are nice and clean, and it basically hid any of the crookedness of the window. Really, really like it. I'm kind of up in the air still, like if I want to stain any of this, because I think it just looks really good in its natural form. So I should put some protective coating on it. But there's a bunch of little nail holes I'm going to go around, not even going to show, but I'm just going to fill those in with some wood filler and sand them down and call this window trimmed. All right, we're on to flooring, so let's get started. So I'm just gonna go through a couple of tips. I'll probably give some up front, and I'll give some as I go. But up front, there's a couple of things that you wanna think about when doing your flooring. One, you should always have like 10% more than you think you're gonna need, just so you have it, you've bought it all at the same time, and there's no differences in having to go back and like purchase a new set from a different store that might have a different humidity level. It'll save you a lot of time and pain in the end. You can always return the extra that you have. It's 10 millimeters thick. It has a under laminate protection barrier, meaning that I do not need to put down any sort of like vapor or moisture barrier, especially with this build. Now, if you are in a place that is like a first floor on top of a basement, or you are on top of concrete, or you are like the second floor in a house that is like above a kitchen or a bathroom, or somewhere where kind of like moisture can rise and collect, you might want to consider adding some type of moisture barrier. There's a bunch of different kinds. There's different thicknesses. They have different characteristics like moisture protection, soundproofing, like if you're on a second floor, and a couple other things that you just might want to do your own research on when it comes to like the specific application of your laminate flooring and what that laminate flooring recommends and what it also comes with built into the flooring. They often come in repeating patterns. So each box that I bought has 6 different pieces. They're 7¼ inches wide by 48 inches long. And I can tell already there are 6 roughly 6, maybe 7 different types of patterns. So what you want to do is open up as many of the boxes as you think you're going to need for a specific room and actually sort your pieces so that as you're building out your floor, you're pulling from different piles so that the pattern itself is sort of as varied and staggered and different as possible. Like the last thing you want is like 2 pieces that look the same right next to each other. It's just going to end up looking kind of odd. Now I have the benefit of a new construction building, meaning that I was able to strategically place all of my drywall a 1/2 inch off the ground, and anywhere that it was like a little bit lower, I just went with a multi-tool and like a 1/2 inch spacer block and just cut off that bottom. So all around my perimeter, there is a 1/2 inch gap. This flooring is 12 millimeters, meaning it is just under 1/2 inch. Now, when you are installing this flooring, whether it's new construction or it is replacing a current floor, the one thing that you want to make sure of pretty much above everything else is to account for expansion. The bigger the room, the more expansion you probably have to account for. You can buy these pretty cheap kits. I think this was like $20, and it comes with all of the tools that you're gonna need to account for that kind of stuff. So that includes a block that allows you to hammer your pieces together, a block that allows you to pull your pieces together when they are butting up against a wall, and it comes with spacer blocks. Now, the recommendation for the flooring that I'm using in the space that I'm using, if you are up against a wall, to add 3/8 inch of a spacing around everywhere. Because what you're gonna ultimately do then is put on new baseboards, which are usually around 1/2 inch thick, and those are gonna go ahead and cover those gaps anyway, so you're not even gonna see them. Baseboards can be thicker than that. There's also a bunch of different methods that you can do to also seal off that gap that you leave. They make rubber foam little tubes that can sort of be inserted in there. You can use 100% silicone caulk to also seal that space. I don't think I have to do any of that for my application. At the most, I think what I'm going to do is get the flooring fully installed and then decide maybe I'll add some silicone caulking just to seal those bottom joists and prevent, I don't know, moisture buildup or things getting into those spaces, or overall just allow this office to have itself like fully sealed off from the outside. The great thing is with it being new construction and having that 1/2 inch gap on the floor is I can basically put my pieces all the way up against the wall. It's gonna make measuring a lot easier. It's gonna avoid me having to use any of those spacer blocks because there's always going to be, if it's flush with the exterior or the interior wall of the drywall, there's always going to be a 1/2 inch gap between the actual base of the flooring and the studs that are exposed down here at the bottom because that drywall is off the ground. So really what I need to make sure I'm doing is just doing everything straight, doing a nice varied pattern and not repeating pieces. One last thing that I didn't know until I actually got into trying to figure out exactly how it's gonna work is when you are doing a transition from a door to your flooring right here, they actually sell very specific, they're called T-trim pieces. They look like this. They come in a bunch of different colors, so you can purchase them to match the flooring that you bought as best as possible. It's probably gonna be not possible to match it 100%. What those do is allow you to have a gap in between your flooring and your sliding door, your French doors, whatever they are, and it creates a nice seamless transition between that door to your flooring. So I got one of those. They sell them in widths up to, I think, like a little over 6 feet for doors that are up to 6 feet wide. And if you're working with a door that's bigger than that, you're probably gonna end up having to order something custom anyways. The best part, and I cannot believe this happened, is what they ask for is a 1 3/8 inch gap between the edge of your first piece of board and the sliding door itself. This gap is exactly 1 3/8. Like I measured state, perfect, exactly what I need. So what that means is for my first row of boards, I don't need to do any notching, which is amazing. Like, not that that's difficult, but it just like, it makes the project even easier because this is literally just a box. If you are buying, or if you ordered laminate flooring, vinyl flooring, whatever, they do recommend that if it's coming from somewhere and you can't verify like where it came from, you should let it sit in the environment for like 48 hours. And if you do that, that allows it to sort of adapt to like the humidity in your space. And therefore when you install it, it's going to be more in tune with the environment and therefore the expansion or the contraction of it will be more negligible than if you install it and like, again, don't account for the right gaps in things. I just bought mine at the store. It's down the street from me, same weather, same relative humidity. So I'm gonna get to installing. I'm not gonna worry about that. And I also have expansion joints, like I said, with that 1/2 inch around everywhere. So I think I am good to go, but wanted to just say that one last tip. That was a ton of information. There's other great videos out there that lay similar types of flooring, but in different sized rooms, in rooms that aren't new construction. They go with slightly different methodology and give different tips that are more specific to their project and their application, like cutting around corners and things like that. I'll link those. I don't want to like overdo it with information in this because I think mine is relatively straightforward and I want to kind of keep the information as simple as possible because I think this overall is pretty simple. I am going to take my first row of pieces. I'm going to start in a corner and I have not decided if I want my very first piece when I walk in the door here to be nice and centered, or I'm just gonna start with a full piece in the corner. Whatever you end up seeing me doing is where I land on it. Regardless, what I wanna do is just rip the tongue off of those 3 pieces at the table saw so I can start with a nice flat, clean edge. It's, again, not gonna be 100% necessary for my situation because I have that gap already. But if you are working with a piece that is going to like butt up against the wall, you're gonna wanna rip that off so that the gap between the wall and the piece is smaller and your trim will cover it, or your baseboard will cover it. I'm gonna go with centered as my first board. And what I'm doing, I've never done this before, but I wanna make sure that I'm marking and measuring properly without actually putting marks on the board. So I'm just using some green tape to take some measurements. One thing that just occurred to me is that because these are tongue and groove like every material is that you can't necessarily use the cutoff on one side to supplement the cutoff on the other side because they have to be oriented a certain way, which I know seems obvious, but it does mean that the cutoffs that I have on each side need to stay on those sides, so I should be very strategic about using those cutoffs more frequently than not so that I don't end up just with a bunch of cut pieces at the end. The other thing that I'm doing, just again to preserve material, is I'm going to first cut these very first pieces to length on the miter saw, and I think that tape also will just help with like making very clean cuts. Then I'm going to rip the pieces on the table saw to get rid of that tongue groove. That way the cutoffs from those pieces again can be used for future end pieces and instead of them being waste because I cut off the tongue on them. I hope that that's clear. Just doing a test fit here on this first one, just to make sure I'm doing it correctly. Having this gap here does make it really nice knowing that eventually anything 1/2 inch inward is going to be covered by baseboard, but my measurements look good. This is nice and centered, so now we can go rip the little groove at the table saw and start laying these pieces down. Because these pieces have this underlayment on it, it doesn't slide that well. Yeah, that's much better. I'm just gonna go slowly because I don't want to scratch the pieces, but they also are scratch resistant. All right, that cut really cleanly on the table saw, and actually it made sense to cut those pieces upside down regardless, because on a table saw, because the way the blade moves and because at least my saw stop has a 0 clearance insert, it gives perfectly clean edges. These float, they're not nailed in like hardwoods to the subfloor in any way, and the weight of it just ends up holding it in place because it's quite heavy as you connect all of these boards. Like I said, no need for me to lay down any sort of like 6mm underlayment. These come with it, so really we're just putting down the first one, and the only thing I want to make sure of is that I do it straight across here, basically in line with this front border of the drywall, because that is going to then have a nice even space across the sill here. It's going to be perpendicular to this wall. It's going to fit the T-transition piece that I talked about before, and it's going to be trimmed out with wood anyways and baseboards after. This is a lovely little tool, cost about 10 bucks. I talked about it earlier. This is gonna allow me to pull my corners together. The space is really tight, so I'm gonna start over here, lay my boards down, tap them into place either with this, but I also read that a regular mallet could damage the tongue on the pieces. So this kit also comes with this block that allows you to use as a spacer in between, tap it, and because of this gap on the bottom, it prevents the piece from damaging the tongue. If you have a dead blow mallet, it works also. So let's do this. I'm gonna do this in real time. This is my long middle piece. So again, these are snapped together boards. So I'm gonna lay my first piece. This isn't the best representation, but you can see tall enough to just slide right underneath there. So again, already have that expansion joint built in place, which is awesome. You can see it slides in over here too. So there's one board. These are snap click together pieces. So I read just going at a slight angle. Get them somewhat attached. Then I'm gonna take this bar, just gonna put it in place here. And lightly hammer it in, and that's gonna close that gap over there. I'm gonna get my last piece that I just cut, clean edge. I'm gonna do the same thing. Again, going at an angle. Wow, that goes together really cleanly. And it's nice and straight too. Awesome. Okay, that was easy. Gonna move on to the next row. For the start of the second row, I'm actually gonna use a cutoff already, or at least I'm gonna test it and see how it looks. So I'm gonna take my piece, come in on it at an angle, give it just a light tap. That seals the gap here, and then I'm just gonna push it down. Take my spacer block, okay. All right, so what I want to do is grab a piece that I haven't used before. I have not used this piece. Make sure the bottom looks good. It also goes without saying, but you want to make sure that your floor is perfectly clear of debris. So like prior to this, I did vacuum everything. I also then took my leaf blower and just dusted out the whole shop. So the way that I read to set these in place is you're gonna do the short end first and then connect it to these pieces. And actually I did just add a couple of shims here so that as I hammered, it wouldn't wanna creep away from me. I'll then pull those back out when I go to do my final row. So let's tongue side this way, kind of get it locked in place too. There we go. All right, I've got 4 rows done, and I hate that tap block. It like doesn't work, or I'm doing something wrong, but I've watched videos and it just doesn't seem to work. It just seems to damage the tongue and groove, which sort of makes the piece pointless. My advice is get a scrap piece that no longer serves a purpose. That becomes your way to tap in pieces. Just lock it in, and this edge here just becomes sacrificial. Whew, that is working way better. Most difficult part is definitely these end pieces, but I think I'm finally finding a rhythm here. Last tip is like, if a piece does get slightly damaged, do not try to make it work. It is not going to fit. I've got half the floor done. See if I can knock out this other half. This room is really small, so it's kind of hard to like capture me doing everything. But after the third row, when I got smart about just using the scrap piece, that got so much easier to tap things in place. Because what I was finding was I couldn't hit it hard enough to actually get the pieces to move without damaging them. So sacrificial piece all the way. When I did get up to the ends, you can see I've got this little tiny strip, which I think was sort of unavoidable. I don't think it's best practice to have such a short piece on the end, but what I found was, again, just cutting this tiny little spacer for me to then put the pull bar around. Could hammer it in place, no problem. And Now I just need to take the remaining couple of pieces I have, rip them into, I can't tell what that is, maybe 1.5 inches, 1 3/4. And those will be the final 3 pieces and the floor will be done. So I'll show you what it looks like when I'm all finished. All right, so we just finished up the floor. It looks awesome. And I think once I got into a groove of things, especially using that sacrificial piece, things went really, really quickly. So the last thing I want to do is finish off this trim piece, going from the sliding door to the laminate flooring. So I bought this kit, and it's a 4-in-1 kit, and it actually specifically can be used for connecting 2 different rooms of flooring together, laminate to carpet, laminate to tile, or hard edges like a sliding glass door to your laminate. So I'm not gonna need every piece here. The installation of this is super straightforward. All I'm gonna do is take this plastic piece, then I will snap in this piece into it, also cut to length. Then I can trim around it with the door casing and the baseboards. So this is plastic and vinyl, super easy to trim. This piece, it's probably a little hard to tell, has this little bump on this side. That goes towards the door. Just make sure there's no debris. I can already tell that I hate this. So what I think I need to do is maybe just cut out a nice piece of white oak and use it as just a standalone piece of trim. Same thickness as these boards. Or maybe I can do something with the extra scraps that I have, but this to me just feels cheap. I'll let you guys know what I end up doing. I ended up just ripping an extra strip and using some brad nails to secure it. And I recognize that one of the things that I said at the beginning was we should account for expansion. This place is really small and there's tons of room for this floor to expand in all directions. So I think just having that there is going to be totally fine. It looks so much better what I had before, so super happy with how it came out. Now that I have those floors done, I can move on to finishing the rest of the trim. So that is going to include the door, so the door casing, the door framing, which is literally going to be the exact same thing that I just did for the window, just a little bit bigger. Once those are installed, we can go ahead and do the baseboards. So let's start with this door. Way back when I did the install of this door, I got the spray foam, excess spray foam on the door. So I read that you can just take some acetone and a cloth and wipe it off. You can also scrape it off with a razor blade. So I'm just gonna clean that up before I put on the jamb because I just feel like it's gonna be a lot easier to do. gotten to the part of the project where it's very, very hot in here because I don't have an AC unit installed yet. It's very hot out. It's not practical to be like keeping the door closed, or it's really hot. So I look really sweaty. All right, so this is done. I think it came out great. I mean, it matches the window almost perfectly. The colors are just slightly different, but when you kind of, again, factor in the color of the roof, the color of the joists, color of this wood, and then the window, which is directly behind the camera. I don't know if they're worth finishing or trying to like put a finish on that sort of brings all the colors together, because I think it just looks really good. But I am really, really happy with my design decision, which is to just do wooden trim on the two fixtures, because I do think that ties it together. So we're gonna move on to baseboards now. So I'm going with just this is 4.5 inches wide. It actually started as 5.5 inches. For some weird reason at my local Home Depot, they didn't have any of the 4.5 inch pieces, but the 5.5 inch pieces, which they did have a ton of, were $1 less per linear foot. So this ended up costing me, I think I bought 27 feet. Like I saved almost 30 bucks and just used the table saw to pull it together. So I'm gonna do mitered corners for all 5 pieces. I think the most challenging one is gonna be this long piece along this wall, which I might literally have to take the screen off the window to put the piece in. But I've got all of these ripped to size. This is very straightforward as far as I understand. I'm using 2-inch brad nails. Just measure twice, cut once. I'm gonna start with the big piece on the wall, then to the 2 small walls, and then do these final corner pieces just so that they can be the last thing that ties it together. So let's do it. All right, baseboards are all done. I'm pretty terrible at that, even when I think I'm cutting perfect 45-degree miters. I think what most people experience is walls are not perfectly 90 degrees, and you can really feel that, especially when you get to the bottoms of pieces. I'm gonna use the white caulk again, gonna go around, gonna do all of the tops and close off any joints, the corners, and try to make them look flush, and then cover up all the nail holes, and then we can go back and paint this tomorrow. I've got green, double layered green frog tape laid everywhere, just don't wanna mess up my new floors, but that's it, let's do it. I know that that was a massive amount of information. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, I really applaud you. If you have any questions about anything that you saw in any parts of this project, please feel free to leave me a comment. I would be more than happy to answer any questions you have about anything that I did on it. If you want to dive into just a little bit more detail or check out comments on any individual videos, make sure you check out the individual videos that I posted. There are 9 of them, and those just might give you a little bit more insight within the comment section or in the information within the video so that you can learn more in the process. Thank you again for checking out this project, and I look forward to seeing you guys on whatever it is that I'm building next. Bye.